Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the Roman calendar reform that put Julius Caesar in the role of history's most ambitious timekeeper. What you're about to discover is how a leap year and some astrological tweaking birthed the calendar we still use today, all while Romans wondered why February always got the short end of the stick. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In ancient Rome, the calendar was a bit like a toga with too many folds, confusing, prone to malfunction, and definitely not suitable for all occasions. Before Julius Caesar decided enough was enough, the Roman calendar was a hot mess of epic proportions. This was a time when months were as unpredictable as that friend who's always 5 minutes away, but shows up an hour late. You know the type. Let's rewind to the days when the Roman calendar was a peculiar beast. It originally had 10 months, starting with March and ending with December. Sounds simple enough, right? Except for the fact that this left them with a whopping 61 days of limbo during the winter. They were kind of like the ancient world's version of out-of-office days. And to make things even more interesting, the lengths of these months were determined by the whims of the moon and Roman priests who would decide when to add an extra month. That's right, they were essentially making it up as they went along, which is a bit like trying to run a marathon with a map drawn by a toddler. The calendar was packed with quirks. For example, the year was supposedly 355 days long, a number that screams, I tried but didn't quite get there. Although they had words like intercalary to describe the extra month they tossed in every couple of years to realign the seasons, you could say the Romans were experts in adding days much like toppings on a pizza. Want another slice of pepperoni? Sure, just slap it on. Need a few more days to balance the calendar. Add a month named Mercedonius. Problem solved, right? Not quite. The politicians of Rome, those crafty devils, quickly realized they could manipulate this chaos to their advantage. If you were a Roman politician, controlling the calendar was like having the keys to the kingdom. Need more time in office? Add a few days. Want to mess with your rivals? Adjust the calendar so their carefully planned political events fall on an unlucky day. It was a world where time was less about ticking clocks and more about ticking off the opposition. And let's not forget the lunar guesswork. Romans relied heavily on the moon's cycle to dictate the months, which sounds poetic, until you realize it meant their year was shorter than a solar year. Imagine trying to plan a harvest only for the seasons to creep up like a surprise party you didn't want. This was serious business for a society that depended on agriculture, and when the calendar fell out of sync with the seasons, it was as if Mother Nature herself was playing a practical joke on them. You might wonder why, in a civilization that built monumental structures and conquered vast territories, the Romans struggled to conquer time itself. Was it sheer laziness, a love for lunar mysteries, or perhaps an elaborate joke that spiraled out of control? The truth is, the calendar was a reflection of the society's complexity and the tug-of-war between tradition and necessity. They were a people who worshipped the past, yet craved control over the future, a duality that was mirrored in their convoluted timekeeping. Take Numa Pompilius, Rome's second king, who decided to add January and February to the calendar around 713 BCE. It was a bold move, but one that still left them with a year that didn't quite fit the Earth's solar cycle. It wasn't until Julius Caesar, a man who was not exactly known for his patience with inefficiency, took the reins and said, "Enough is enough," that the calendar started to resemble something more functional. So, the next time you glance at your calendar and grumble about daylight saving time, spare a thought for the Romans who were trying to navigate a calendar system that was as reliable as a chocolate teapot. They might not have gotten it right initially, but they sure gave us a fascinating story about the chaos that comes when humans try to put a leash on time. And so we find ourselves at the doorstep of Julius Caesar's grand entrance, a man whose ambition was as vast as the Roman Empire itself. If the Roman calendar was a chaotic carnival, then Caesar was the no-nonsense ringmaster who decided it was high time to bring some order to this unruly circus. Picture this. It's 46 BC, and Caesar looks at the calendar system like a chef surveying a part of overcooked spaghetti. He mutters to himself, "We can do better than this." The Roman calendar, with its lunar whims and political manipulations, was an outdated relic. It was like trying to navigate the bustling streets of Rome with a map scribbled on a soggy napkin. So, Caesar did what any self-respecting reformer would do. He went back to the drawing board and borrowed liberally from the Egyptians. Yes, those pyramid-building, sun-worshipping geniuses who had mastered the idea of a solar year long before Rome was even a twinkle in Romulus's eye. You see, the Egyptians had been using a calendar based on a 365-day year, aligning neatly with the solar cycle. This was the ancient equivalent of discovering the cheat sheet for a notoriously difficult exam. So when Caesar sauntered into Egypt and met with Cleopatra, he must have thought, "Hey, those Egyptians really know their stuff." Thus, the Julian calendar was born, a testament to the idea that imitation is indeed the most sincere form of flattery. Now, let's talk numbers. Caesar's reform added a 10th month to the year, bringing the total to a neat 365 days. This was a drastic improvement over the previous haphazard system, which was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Each year was now divided into 12 months, with the addition of a leap year every 4 years to account for the extra quarter day that the Earth takes to orbit the Sun. This was revolutionary, a concept so forward-thinking that it stuck around for over 600 years. The economic impact of the Julian calendar was profound. By aligning the calendar with the seasons, Caesar ensured that agrarian activities were no longer a gamble against the moon's capriciousness. Farmers could finally predict the planting and harvesting seasons with a degree of certainty, much like having a GPS instead of relying on the stars. This stability helped bolster the Roman economy, as agricultural output became more reliable and less subject to the whims of an erratic calendar. Of course, the political ramifications were equally significant. By taking control of time itself, Caesar effectively wrested power from the Roman priests who had been manipulating the calendar for their own gain. This move was akin to seizing the remote control from a sibling who always hogged the best channels. Suddenly, time was no longer a tool for political gamesmanship, but a standardized system that everyone could follow. Well, everyone who was anyone in the Roman Empire, at least. As with any reform, there were detractors. Some Romans were resistant to change, clinging to the old lunar calendar like a favorite pair of worn-out sandals. But Caesar was undeterred. He knew that the path to progress was often paved with the rubble of old traditions. In a way, his reform was the ancient world's equivalent of switching from flip phones to smartphones. Once you had a taste of the new system, there was no going back. One mustn't overlook the personal touch Caesar added to the calendar. Ever the narcissist, he renamed the month of Quintilis to Julius in his honor, a move that was both a testament to his ego and a reminder of his enduring influence. It's worth noting that this wasn't the last time a Roman leader would use the calendar as a canvas for self-promotion, but more on that in a later part. The Julian calendar was not without its flaws, of course. Despite its brilliance, it overestimated the solar year by about 11 minutes, a discrepancy that would accumulate over centuries and necessitate future adjustments. But in Caesar's time, this was a minor oversight, overshadowed by the monumental leap forward his reform represented. In the grand tapestry of history, Caesar's calendar reform was a bold stroke that not only synchronized Rome with the sun, but also laid the groundwork for how we understand time today. It was a rare instance where a single decision rippled across centuries, influencing the way civilizations, economies, and societies functioned. Amidst the political intrigue and personal ambition, Caesar's legacy as a reformer of time itself stands as a testament to his vision. And so, with the Julian calendar firmly in place, Rome marched on, now with a reliable compass by which to navigate the years. The story of the Roman calendar reform is far from over, though, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of time and see how Caesar's legacy withstood the test of, well, time itself. As Caesar's new calendar strutted onto the Roman stage like a centurion with something to prove, public reaction was as mixed as a salad at a Roman banquet. Here's the thing. Not everyone was thrilled about this leap year concept. To the average Roman, it was about as welcome as realizing your toga had unraveled in the marketplace. The idea of adding an extra day every 4 years seemed more like a mathematical prank than a practical solution. After all, who really wants to deal with a day that pops up like an uninvited guest at a dinner party? Now, let's talk about the Annus Confusionis, or the Year of Confusion, which sounds like the title of a lost Shakespearean play, but was actually the chaotic transition year when Caesar added a whopping 90 days to the calendar. Imagine the bureaucratic headache this caused. It was like an ancient version of Let's Fix the Glitch, except instead of software, it was time itself. This meant 46 BC was stretched like a loaf of Roman bread dough, lasting 445 days. Yes, you heard that right, 445 days. It was the longest year in Roman history, and boy, did it feel like it. How did the Romans handle this abrupt shift? With a mixture of bemusement and grumbling, naturally. For those trying to plan their lives around this new timetable, it was like trying to dance to a tune that kept changing tempo. Picture a Roman merchant scratching his head while trying to figure out if he should restock his wares or prepare for the next festival. What festival? Who knew anymore? It was as if someone had taken the scroll of events and tossed it into the Tiber. This calendrical chaos didn't just stop at merchants. Entire Roman bureaucracy found itself tangled in a web of paperwork that seemed to multiply like rabbits. Imagine Roman tax collectors, quills in hand, attempting to reconcile their ledgers with this new and improved, yet utterly baffling timeline. It was a bureaucratic nightmare where even the most seasoned clerks threw their hands up in exasperation. If ever there was a time for Romans to question their reality, this was it. Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. There were, of course, the opportunists who saw the extended year as a chance to extend their own personal agendas. Politicians had a field day, quite literally, with extra time to maneuver their political chess pieces. For them, it was an unexpected bonus round in the game of Roman power dynamics. Perhaps some even saw the lengthened year as a metaphor for their own ambitions, stretching ever onward. Socially, this period was a fascinating study in human adaptability. Romans were nothing if not resilient. They grumbled, yes, but they also adapted. Life moved on, albeit with a few more days to navigate it. People joked that Caesar had given them the gift of time, but as with any gift, it came with strings attached. The strings in this case being the need to adjust everything from religious ceremonies to mundane daily routines. Even the most mundane affair required a recalibration of expectations. In the grand scheme of things, Caesar's reforms were a testament to the complexities of managing an empire that was as sprawling as it was diverse. The calendar reform was more than just a mathematical correction. It was a shift in how Romans perceived time itself. No longer was time the whimsical plaything of lunar cycles and priestly decrees. It was now tethered to the sun, a constant and reliable guide in a world that was anything but. This new calendar wasn't just about hours, days, and months. It was about control over time, nature, and ultimately, the Roman Empire itself. By syncing the calendar with the solar year, Caesar had pulled off a political masterstroke. He had not only aligned Rome with the cosmos, but had also firmly grasped the reins of temporal power. And in a world where power was everything, this was no small feat. Of course, no discussion of Roman calendars would be complete without a nod to the economic implications. Agriculture, the lifeblood of the Roman economy, finally had a reliable schedule to follow. Farmers could plan their planting and harvesting with newfound accuracy. It was as if Mother Nature had finally agreed to a truce, allowing Romans to predict the seasons without the gamble of lunar guesswork. This newfound predictability offered a stability that helped the Roman economy to flourish, as more reliable harvests meant increased trade and prosperity. Yet, as with any reform, there were those who resisted. Traditionalists clung to the old ways like barnacles to a Roman galley. For them, the lunar calendar was more than just a timekeeping system. It was a connection to Rome's storied past. Changing it felt like tearing a page from the history books. But Caesar, ever the pragmatist, understood that progress often requires breaking with tradition. His reforms were a bold declaration that Rome was ready to embrace the future, even if it meant bidding farewell to some of its cherished customs. In the end, Caesar's calendar reform was a microcosm of the Roman Empire itself. Grand, ambitious, and not without its flaws. It was a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the eternal struggle between tradition and innovation. And while the Julian calendar would eventually give way to the Gregorian calendar centuries later, its impact was undeniable. It was the foundation upon which modern timekeeping was built, a legacy that echoes through the corridors of history. As we leave the Annus Confusionis behind, we can appreciate the courage and foresight it took to reorder the very fabric of time. So, next time you glance at your calendar, remember the Romans who navigated the tumultuous waters of change, all while wearing togas and sandals. And as we prepare to delve deeper into the story of Rome's temporal evolution, let's keep in mind that the saga of the Roman calendar is far from over. We're just getting started on this journey through time, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complexities of how Rome shaped the way we understand the days, months, and years of our lives. And so, as the Romans shuffled out of the Annus Confusionis like groggy revelers after a particularly wild bacchanal, they found themselves standing on the precipice of a new era of timekeeping. With the Julian calendar now firmly in place, it was as if Caesar had gifted them a cosmic GPS, aligning their civic and agricultural lives with the predictability of the solar cycle. The Romans had unwittingly stumbled upon a legacy that would outlast even their empire, the concept of a predictable holiday season. Yes, those predictable holidays we take for granted today, marking time with assurance that December 25th will indeed fall in December, owe their existence in part to Caesar's reform. This newfound regularity was a revelation for a civilization that had been at the mercy of the moon's capricious whims and the political machinations of a few powerful priests. Imagine the relief of knowing that Saturnalia, the Roman festival of merriment and gift-giving, would consistently occur around the same time each year. It was like finally syncing your Spotify playlist to play all your favorite tracks without a glitch. But the Julian calendar's impact didn't stop at the Roman borders. As the empire expanded, the calendar traveled with it, infiltrating the timekeeping systems of the newly conquered territories. From the windswept shores of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, the Julian calendar was like a cultural Trojan horse, subtly reshaping local customs. In places like Gaul and Hispania, where the indigenous calendars were as varied as the local dialects, the Roman system brought a semblance of order. And let's face it, nothing says imperial dominance quite like dictating how people mark time. Now, let's fast forward a bit to the Middle Ages, a time when Europe's calendar situation was as murky as a medieval alehouse. You see, by then, the Julian calendar was still in use, but those pesky 11 extra minutes lost each year had begun to add up. Over centuries, this discrepancy pushed the calendar out of sync with the equinoxes, meaning that Easter, the most important Christian holiday, was slowly drifting away from its intended springtime setting. It was as if the Easter bunny was perpetually late, harping into town when everyone had already packed up their bonnets and baskets. This calendrical drift became a critical issue for the Church, which was deeply invested in maintaining the sanctity of its religious calendar. Enter Pope Gregory Roman XIII, a man with a mission to fix this celestial snafu. In 1582, he introduced the Gregorian calendar, a refined version of Caesar's system, which included a more accurate leap year formula. The new calendar corrected the accumulated error by skipping 10 days that October, leaving people to wonder if they'd slept through a week of their lives. Talk about a temporal magic trick. The adoption of the Gregorian calendar wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Protestant countries were suspicious of any papal decree, even one as seemingly benign as a calendar reform. England, for instance, didn't adopt the new calendar until 1752, nearly 170 years after its introduction. In the interim, Brits clung to the Julian calendar like a stubborn child, refusing to let go of their favorite toy. When they finally made the switch, they had to skip 11 days, resulting in public protests demanding the return of their stolen days. It was a perfect storm of superstition and skepticism, proving that even the simplest changes can spark the most profound resistance. Despite the Gregorian calendar's eventual global domination, the Julian calendar left an indelible mark on history. It's a testament to the power of Roman influence that a system devised in 46 BC could persist in some corners of the world well into the 20th century. In fact, the Orthodox Church still uses the Julian calendar today for liturgical purposes, a nod to tradition that exemplifies the eternal tug-of-war between innovation and heritage. Economically, the alignment of time with the solar year facilitated trade and agriculture on a scale previously unimaginable. It allowed merchants to plan their journeys and transactions with greater confidence, knowing that time was no longer an unpredictable adversary. The predictable calendar also meant that tax collections and civic duties could be scheduled with military precision, ensuring the smooth administration of the vast Roman Empire. In a world before the invention of the mechanical clock, the Julian calendar gave people a framework to organize their lives, a structure around which to build their societies. It was a tool for empire building, allowing Rome to project its power across vast distances by synchronizing its subjects with a common understanding of time. The calendar was as much a symbol of Roman authority as the aqueducts and roads that crisscrossed the ancient world. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Julian calendar, for all its brilliance, was a pragmatic solution to a very Roman problem, the need for order in a chaotic world. It was less about the beauty of celestial mechanics and more about the practicalities of ruling an empire. By standardizing time, Caesar and his successors created a mechanism for control, a way to bind the disparate peoples of the empire under a single temporal banner. And therein lies the irony. The Julian calendar, born out of a desire to impose order, ultimately became a source of contention and debate, setting the stage for future calendar reforms that would make modern office scheduling look like a leisurely afternoon. In the centuries that followed, as Europe grappled with the transition to the Gregorian calendar, the legacy of Julius Caesar's reform continued to echo through time, a reminder of the enduring human quest to master the dimension that governs our lives. As we pause here in our exploration of the Roman calendar's impact, it's clear that this story is far from over. The tale of how the Romans reshaped time is a rich tapestry, woven with threads of political intrigue, cultural assimilation, and the relentless march of progress. So hold onto your timepieces, because our journey through the annals of history is about to take another fascinating turn. We'll dive deeper into the world of calendars and the complex legacy they've left behind. Stay tuned, because this saga of time is just getting warmed up. As we delve into the annals of time, let's face it, humans have always been a little resistant to change, especially when it means waking up to find that 10 days of your life have vanished into the ether. This was exactly the case when Pope Gregory Roman XIII decided that humanity needed a calendrical makeover in 1582. The Gregorian calendar wasn't just a minor tweak. It was more like a cosmic spring cleaning, tossing out those accumulated errors like last season's fashion faux pas. Back in those days, adjusting the calendar wasn't simply a matter of changing the wallpaper on your phone. It required a papal bull and a collective leap of faith. Gregory's reform was essentially a time travel trick, hopping over 10 entire days in October. Imagine going to bed on October 4th and waking up on October 15th. Your plans for the 5th to 14th suddenly rendered moot. Dinner party on the 10th. Sorry, it never existed. It was like the world's most elaborate magic trick. Except this time, the rabbit stayed in the hat. The reaction? Well, let's just say that not everyone was clapping. Protestants across Europe treated the Gregorian calendar with all the enthusiasm of a cat confronted with a bathtub. They saw it as another papal plot to undermine their burgeoning independence. England, always the rebellious teenager of Europe, refused to adopt the new calendar until 1752, preferring to cling to the Julian system while the rest of the continent moved on. When they finally made the switch, riots broke out with cries of "Give us our 11 days," as if time itself was a commodity that could be traded back. Resistance wasn't just a Protestant pastime. In Russia, the Julian calendar stuck around until the Bolsheviks, never known for their subtlety, finally dragged the country into the Gregorian fold in 1918. The Russian Orthodox Church, however, still celebrates Christmas on January 7th, sticking with the old ways like a favorite pair of woolen socks. It's a curious reminder of how deeply traditions can embed themselves in the cultural psyche, long after the rest of the world has moved on. The economic implications of this calendrical shuffle were significant. In the world of commerce, time was money, and a predictable calendar was the difference between boom and bust. Merchants needed to know when their ships would sail, and their goods would sell. The Gregorian calendar offered them the precision of a Swiss watch, aligning festivals and feasts with the seasons, ensuring that Easter didn't float around the calendar like a springtime spectre. But the transition wasn't just about numbers and dates. It was about power, too. By standardizing the calendar, the Catholic Church reinforced its authority over time itself, projecting its influence across the globe. This wasn't just about keeping Easter in line. It was a statement of supremacy, a celestial chess move that put the Vatican in checkmate against its Protestant rivals. The Gregorian calendar became a symbol of Catholic unity, a temporal bond that tied its followers together in a single rhythm. As the world slowly adjusted to Pope Gregory's grand design, the calendar became a tool for empire building, aiding European powers in their global conquests. It was easier to run an empire when everyone was on the same page, or calendar, as it were. By the 18th century, the Gregorian calendar was the standard across Europe and beyond, a testament to its enduring appeal. Let's not forget the human element in this saga. For the average person, the calendar wasn't just a tool for marking time. It was a framework for living. It dictated the rhythms of work and play, the timing of markets and marriages. Imagine the confusion when workers showed up to find their shifts had been erased, or when festivals were celebrated on seemingly random days. It was like trying to play a symphony with half the orchestra missing. The legacy of these reforms is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. The Gregorian calendar has become the global standard, its accuracy a tribute to humanity's quest for order in a chaotic universe. It governs our lives with a precision that Caesar would have admired, syncing our smartphones and scheduling our lives down to the minute. Yet, it's also a reminder of the fragility of time, how easily it can be reshaped by those in power. In this age of digital calendars and atomic clocks, it's easy to take our timekeeping for granted. But as we look back at the tumultuous history of the Roman and Gregorian calendars, we're reminded of our ancestors' struggles to master time. It's a saga of ambition and innovation, resistance and acceptance, a dance between past and future that continues to shape our lives today. So, as you glance at your calendar, spare a thought for the Romans and their lunar conundrums, for Caesar's bold reform, and for the 10 days that disappeared in 1582. Time may march on, but the stories of those who sought to tame it are as timeless as ever. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through the tangled web of history's most enduring calendar reforms. Until next time, keep your days in order and your clocks ticking, because in the world of timekeeping, there's always another chapter waiting to unfold. In the grand tapestry of European history, few threads are as tangled or as colorful as the one belonging to Catherine the Great. Born in 1729 as Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst, she hailed from a relatively obscure German principality. Let's face it, her hometown of Stettin, now Szczecin in Poland, was hardly the epicenter of glamour and intrigue, but Sophie had ambitions that reached far beyond the cobblestone streets of her birthplace. At the tender age of 15, she was whisked away to the Russian court to wed Peter of Holstein-Gottorp, the heir to the Russian throne, who was also her second cousin. Because, nothing screams romantic love story quite like marrying your cousin for political gain. Now, Peter wasn't exactly the Prince Charming of fairy tales. In fact, he was more like the guy who shows up to a costume party wearing the wrong era's garb and somehow thinks he's nailed it. Imagine a young man so obsessed with Prussian military uniforms that he paraded around the Russian court in them, completely oblivious to the cultural cringe he induced. It's like a guy in flip-flops at a winter wedding, just awkward. But Peter's eccentricities were the least of Sophie's worries. Arriving in Russia, she was met with a world as cold as its winters and as complex as its political intrigues. Russia was a beast of an empire, sprawling across 6 million square miles of land, with a population of around 23 million people, a far cry from the modest territories back in Germany. The Russian court was a hotbed of Byzantine politics, where allegiances shifted like sand dunes in a desert storm. It was a place where even the walls had ears, and those ears were often attached to heads with sharp knives. So what did Sophie do? She reinvented herself, of course. She converted to Orthodoxy, adopting the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, or Catherine for short. This wasn't just a name change. It was a calculated move to solidify her position and endear herself to her new homeland. Catherine was a quick study. She learned Russian, a language as different from her native German as borscht is from bratwurst, and she mastered the art of political survival. Her intelligence and charm quickly won her allies, but not everyone was pleased with the new German import. Empress Elizabeth, Peter's aunt and the reigning monarch, was a formidable character who kept Catherine on a short leash, scrutinizing her every move. Yet, Catherine's wit and adaptability kept her afloat in these treacherous waters. Now, let's address the horse in the room, the myth that refuses to die. You've probably heard the salacious rumor that Catherine died, attempting to engage in intimate relations with a horse. It's a story as ridiculous as it is persistent, but let's be clear, it's complete bunk. Despite its appeal to the scandal mongers of history, this tale was concocted by her enemies to sully her reputation. In truth, Catherine died of a stroke in 1796, on November 17 to be precise, at the age of 67. It seems even in death, she couldn't escape the political smears that plagued her life. Back to the living Catherine, who was busy navigating the Russian court's labyrinthine politics. Her marriage to Peter was, unsurprisingly, strained from the get-go. The couple's incompatibility was as obvious as a bear in a ballet. While Catherine was busy expanding her knowledge and charm, Peter was, shall we say, less industrious. He often neglected his duties, preferring to play with toy soldiers, a pastime that, while quaint, wasn't exactly endearing to his subjects. Catherine's intellect and grace stood in sharp contrast to Peter's buffoonery, and she quickly garnered more respect and admiration than her husband. It wasn't long before she began to build her own power base, forming alliances with key figures in the Russian court. Among these was Count Sergei Saltykov, her first lover, who provided a much-needed distraction from her lackluster marriage. But more than just a romantic entanglement, Saltykov represented Catherine's growing political acumen. She understood the value of strategic partnerships, whether they were forged in the boudoir or the ballroom. As Catherine's influence grew, so did her ambitions. She was no longer content to play second fiddle to Peter, whose antics were increasingly seen as a threat to the stability of the Russian Empire. By 1762, the winds of change were blowing through the corridors of power. Peter had ascended to the throne as Peter Roman III, but his reign was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. His unpopular policies, like his decision to withdraw from the 7 Years' War, alienated him from the military and the nobility alike. It was a classic case of too little tact, too late. Sensing an opportunity, Catherine orchestrated a coup with the help of the military and her loyal supporters. On July 9, 1762, Peter Roman III was deposed, and Catherine was proclaimed Empress of Russia. It was a bloodless coup, a testament to her cunning and strategy. Peter, ever the tragicomic figure, abdicated without much fuss, only to meet a mysterious end shortly thereafter, murdered, it is believed, by his captors. Catherine's ascent to power was complete, and she would go on to rule Russia for 34 years, leaving an indelible mark on history. And so, the minor German princess, who once navigated the icy waters of the Russian court, transformed into Catherine the Great, an empress whose legacy would be defined by her intellect, her reforms, and yes, her scandalous personal life. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's just appreciate the audacity and grit it took for a young woman from Stettin to become one of the most powerful figures in history. Catherine's journey was anything but ordinary, and her story, as you'll see, is one for the ages. Catherine's rise to power was like watching a master chess player execute a series of brilliant moves while everyone else was still figuring out which pieces did what. After ousting Peter Roman III in a coup that had more drama than a reality TV season finale, Catherine didn't waste any time settling into her new role as Empress. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't a Disney movie where everyone sang a happy tune. Power in 18th century Russia was as volatile as nitroglycerin, and Catherine knew she had to tread carefully, or she'd end up on the wrong side of a dagger. First things first, Catherine needed to secure her position. Her coup might have been bloodless, but her grip on power was anything but guaranteed. She had to charm the nobility, placate the military, and win over the Russian Orthodox Church, a trifecta of influence that could make or break her reign. Imagine juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Now add in a few thousand miles of Russian wilderness, and you've got the idea. To fortify her rule, Catherine turned to the intellectual currents of the Enlightenment, the 18th century's version of a self-help book for rulers. She corresponded with the likes of Voltaire and Diderot, seeking to position herself as an enlightened despot. This wasn't just about vanity. It was a savvy PR move that set her apart from the garden-variety autocrats of the time. By aligning herself with the Enlightenment's ideals of reason and progress, Catherine could present herself as a reformer rather than a usurper. It was like rebranding a fast food chain as a health-conscious bistro, tricky, but not impossible with the right spin. In 1767, Catherine took a bold step by convening the Legislative Commission, a body tasked with considering a new legal code for Russia. Picture a parliamentary session with over 500 delegates from across the empire, each with their own agenda, opinions, and let's face it, egos. Her nakaz, or instruction, was a document that laid out her vision for modern Russia. It included progressive ideas like the abolition of torture and the establishment of legal equality, heady stuff for a nation still steeped in serfdom. The commission was more talk than action, but it was a strategic move to showcase Catherine's commitment to reform and modernization. Meanwhile, Catherine was busy crafting her image as a benevolent ruler. She patronized the arts, established the Hermitage Museum, and founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, Russia's first state-financed higher education institution for women. This was her version of a PR blitz, an attempt to reshape her image from usurper to a champion of culture and learning. It was a bit like launching a social media campaign, only with more oil paintings and fewer hashtags. But Catherine wasn't just about high-minded ideals and cultural pursuits. She had a pragmatic side that understood the economic realities of ruling a sprawling empire. The Russian economy was an unwieldy beast, with agriculture as its backbone and serf labor as its unfortunate reality. Catherine's policies sought to increase agricultural productivity and expand trade, crucial steps for an empire that stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific Ocean. Her reign saw the annexation of Crimea in 1783, providing Russia with a strategic port on the Black Sea, a geopolitical move that would send ripples through European politics for decades. While Catherine's public persona was that of an enlightened ruler, her private life was a different story, one filled with intrigue, alliances, and yes, a fair share of scandal. Her relationships with influential men were as much about politics as they were about romance. Take Grigory Potemkin, for example. A charismatic military leader and statesman, Potemkin was not just Catherine's lover, but one of her closest advisors. Together, they orchestrated the colonization of newly acquired territories and spearheaded military reforms, strengthening Russia's position on the global stage. It was a partnership that blurred the lines between personal and political, but in the high-stakes world of imperial rule, such distinctions often fell by the wayside. Catherine's reign was not without its challenges. The Pugachev Rebellion of 1773-1775 was a stark reminder of the simmering discontent among the peasantry. This massive uprising, led by a Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev, who claimed to be the deceased Peter Roman III, was the largest peasant revolt in Russian history. It exposed the deep-seated grievances of the rural population and the fragile nature of Catherine's rule. After a brutal suppression, the rebellion was quashed, but it underscored the need for continued vigilance and reform. Despite the turbulence, Catherine's ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Russian politics was nothing short of remarkable. She expanded the empire's borders, reformed its institutions, and left an indelible mark on its culture. Yet, her legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with both triumphs and contradictions. As we delve deeper into her reign, we'll uncover more about the woman who defied expectations and reshaped a nation. But for now, let's appreciate the audacity and savvy of a ruler who knew that in the Game of Thrones, it's not enough to win the crown, you have to keep it. As we journey deeper into Catherine the Great's labyrinth of reforms, it's essential to understand that her domestic policies were as much about smoke and mirrors as they were about tangible change. You see, Catherine was a maestro of political theatre. juggling progressive ideals with the harsh realities of an empire built on the backs of serfs. The Enlightenment might have whispered sweet nothings of liberty and equality into her ear, but Russia was still very much a feudal behemoth that didn't budge easily. Now, let's talk about the economy, because if there's one thing that keeps an empire ticking, it's cold, hard cash. Catherine knew this better than most, and set her sights on modernizing Russia's economic landscape with the zeal of a Silicon Valley startup founder. Her administration worked tirelessly to boost trade and industry, recognizing that Russia's economic backbone was as stiff as a Cossack's vodka. Enter the Free Economic Society, established in 1765, which aimed to encourage agricultural innovation and the sharing of best practices among landowners. This was Catherine's attempt to drag Russian agriculture, kicking and screaming, into the 18th century. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Russian economy was still very much dependent on serfdom, a system where peasants were practically glued to the land they worked. It was feudalism with a Russian twist, and Catherine's attempts to reform it were akin to applying lipstick on a bear. She tinkered around the edges, issuing the charter to the nobility in 1785, which granted certain freedoms to the aristocracy but left serfs out in the cold. It's the kind of reform that looks good on paper but doesn't change the fact that serfs were treated like human plough horses. Still, Catherine wasn't blind to the plight of the serfs. She was just caught in a political catch-22. Any move to emancipate them threatened to upset the very nobility she needed to keep her throne secure. Talk about being between a rock and a hard place. Her economic policies, therefore, walked a tightrope between promoting innovation and maintaining the status quo. It's like trying to revolutionize your wardrobe while still wearing your grandmother's hand-me-downs. Then there was education, the jewel in Catherine's crown of reforms. She believed fervently in the power of education to transform society, and in 1786, she rolled out the Statute of National Education. This ambitious policy aimed to establish a network of state-funded schools across the empire, a vision as grand as it was revolutionary. The idea was to offer free education to boys and girls alike, a radical notion in a world where women were often seen as second-class citizens. But as with most utopian dreams, reality had other plans. The rollout was patchy at best, with schools popping up in urban centers while rural areas remained educational deserts. It's like launching a nationwide Wi-Fi network and then realizing half the country still uses dial-up. Catherine's educational initiatives also included the founding of the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens in 1764, the first state-financed institution of higher learning for women in Russia. This was Catherine's attempt to cultivate a new generation of educated women who could contribute to society beyond the confines of domestic life. It was all very progressive, but let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't exactly a feminist utopia. The curriculum was heavy on etiquette and light on, say, calculus, more finishing school than future-proofing. Meanwhile, Catherine's cultural policies were a masterclass in image building. She knew that an enlightened ruler needed the arts like a knight needed a sword. Enter the Hermitage Museum, founded in 1764, a testament to her passion for art and culture. By the end of her reign, the Hermitage housed over 4,000 works of art, including masterpieces by the likes of Rembrandt and Rubens. Catherine's collection was a statement to the world. Russia was not just a land of birch trees and borscht, but a cultural powerhouse in its own right. Now, while Catherine was busy curating her art collection, her foreign policy was making waves, quite literally. The annexation of Crimea in 1783 was a strategic masterstroke, giving Russia a crucial foothold on the Black Sea. It was a geopolitical shake-up that would echo through European politics for years. But acquiring new territory was like buying a fixer-upper. It came with its own set of problems. Integrating these lands into the Russian Empire required more than just a change in flag. It demanded infrastructure, resources, and you guessed it, money. All these grand projects came with a hefty price tag. Catherine's reign saw the expansion of Russia's territory and ambitions, but it also strained the empire's coffers. Her policies were often a balancing act between visionary reform and pragmatic constraints. It's one thing to dream big and another to foot the bill. The cost of war, expansion, and reform kept the treasury on its toes, leaving Catherine juggling finances as skillfully as she did political allegiances. In the end, Catherine the Great's attempts to modernize Russia were a mixed bag of triumphs and trade-offs. Her reign was a period of significant change, yet it remained tethered to the old world. She was a ruler who talked the talk of progress, but often walked the walk of compromise. And isn't that the irony of leadership? The very systems you seek to dismantle are the ones that hold you up. Catherine's legacy, therefore, is a tapestry woven with threads of enlightenment and the inescapable weight of tradition. As we move forward in this historical odyssey, we'll delve deeper into the complexities of Catherine's later years. Her story is far from over, and the challenges she faced are as compelling as the reforms she championed. So, buckle up, because the next chapter in Catherine's saga promises to be as enthralling as a Russian winter night, chilling, intricate, and full of unexpected turns. So, here we are, diving headfirst into Catherine the Great's foreign escapades, where the stakes were as high as a czarist eyebrow. You see, Catherine wasn't just rearranging furniture in the Russian domestic scene. She was playing a geopolitical chess game with the finesse of a grandmaster and the audacity of someone who's never lost a bet. If the domestic realm was about keeping the peace, the international stage was about making a splash, or, in her case, making waves across the Black Sea. Now, let's talk about Crimea, the crown jewel in Catherine's imperial diadem. Acquiring Crimea in 1783 was like catching the golden snitch in a Quidditch match, game-changing and oh so desirable. Why, you ask? Well, this wasn't just about adding a pretty peninsula to the empire's map. It was about securing a strategic port that would give Russia the naval dominance it craved in the Black Sea. Picture it, a deep-water port that could shelter the Russian fleet, a launchpad for influence over the Ottoman Empire, and, let's be honest, a place with better weather than St. Petersburg. Crimea was the geopolitical equivalent of beachfront property, and Catherine had her eyes set on it like a hawk on a hare. But this wasn't some romantic escapade. It was a calculated move in a centuries-old tug-of-war between Russia and the Ottomans. The Russo-Turkish War of 1768-1774 was where Catherine flexed her military muscles, showcasing her empire's might. It was a war as brutal as it was absurd, featuring battles that would make any armchair historian do a double take. Take the Battle of Chesma in 1770, for instance, a naval skirmish where the outnumbered Russian fleet set the Ottoman armada ablaze with a little help from the wind and some well-aimed artillery. It was a victory that sent shockwaves across Europe and had even the most jaded diplomats raising their eyebrows and their glasses. The Treaty of Kusuk-Kainaka in 1774 was the cherry on top, granting Russia not only Crimea, but also access to the Black Sea and the right to protect Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire. It was a diplomatic coup that expanded Russian influence and made Catherine the darling of Orthodox subjects everywhere. Of course, she didn't stop there. Like a savvy real estate mogul, Catherine knew the value of expanding her empire's borders. Her reign saw the empire stretch its muscles even further, annexing territories like Novorossiya, modern-day southern Ukraine, and parts of Poland in the partitions that carved up the once mighty Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But let's not get too misty-eyed about these conquests. While Catherine's empire building was impressive, it wasn't exactly a fairy tale of diplomacy and benevolence. The annexations were often as ruthless as a tax collector on payday, displacing populations and redrawing borders with all the subtlety of a marching army. In the case of Poland, the partitions of 1772, 1793, and 1795 were like a slow-motion dismemberment orchestrated by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. It was a grim reminder that for all the Enlightenment ideals floating around, 18th-century politics was still a blood sport. Now, what about the absurdities of 18th-century warfare? Picture generals in powdered wigs, strategizing over maps while their troops faced the grim realities of mud, disease, and supply shortages. The Russian army, despite its victories, was often plagued by logistical nightmares and the brutal Russian winter, a foe as unyielding as any human adversary. And then there were the diplomatic maneuvers, where alliances shifted like sand dunes in a desert storm. Catherine played this game with a deft hand, aligning herself with powers like Austria when it suited her, and dropping them like a hot potato when it didn't. Take her dealings with Frederick the Great of Prussia, for example. Their correspondence was a blend of mutual admiration and thinly veiled rivalry. Frederick once quipped that Russia was an elephant ridden by a watchful rider, acknowledging the vastness of the empire and Catherine's skill in steering it. But beneath the diplomatic niceties lay a deep-seated strategic calculus. Catherine knew that to maintain her empire's position, she had to keep the balance of power in Europe as finely tuned as a Stradivarius. Yet, for all her successes on the grand stage, Catherine's foreign policies were not without their critics. Some saw her expansionist ambitions as reckless, stretching Russia's resources and provoking tensions with other powers. Her annexation of Crimea, in particular, set off a geopolitical ripple effect that would continue to reverberate through history, right into the modern era. But that's a story for another time. As we delve deeper into Catherine's world, it's clear that her reign was a complex tapestry of triumphs and trials. She was a ruler who understood the art of power, wielding it with a mix of charm, cunning, and, when necessary, cold steel. Her legacy is one of expansion and consolidation, of a Russia that was at once an enlightened empire and a formidable military power. Yet, like all great figures, Catherine's story is as much about the myths as it is about the reality, a dance between the legend and the harsh truths of history. As we leave this chapter of her saga, let's remember that Catherine's journey wasn't just about conquests and treaties. It was about securing a legacy that would endure beyond her reign, a testament to her vision and tenacity. Her story is far from over, and as we move forward, we'll uncover more about the Empress who dared to dream big and play for high stakes in a world where the only constant was change. So, stay tuned, because the next act in Catherine's epic tale promises to be as riveting as a Russian novel, full of intrigue, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. When it comes to Catherine the Great, separating fact from fiction can feel like untangling a set of earphones after they've spent a night in your pocket. The truth is, Catherine's legacy is a mixed bag of genuine achievements and some gloriously exaggerated tales. She was, after all, both a product and a master of her time, a ruler who understood the power of image and myth as much as the weight of governance. Let's start with the achievements, because, frankly, they're impressive enough to make most rulers look like they're playing checkers while she's over here dominating the chessboard. Catherine's reign from 1762 to 1796 wasn't just about expanding Russia's borders. It was about pushing the empire into the modern age. Her efforts to reform the legal system included a 1767 commission to draft a new law code, which, while it didn't produce tangible results, was a bold statement of intent. Her nakaz was a manifesto for an enlightened Russia that sought to abolish torture and promote equality before the law, a radical notion in a land that still chained its people to the soil with serfdom. On the cultural front, Catherine turned Russia into a powerhouse worthy of its European peers. She founded the Hermitage Museum, which grew to house over 4,000 works of art by the end of her reign. Think of it as her own version of curating a blockbuster Netflix series, only with less binge-watching and more oil paintings. The Hermitage wasn't just a vanity project. It was a declaration that Russia was not only a military giant, but also a cultural titan. Through her support of the arts, Catherine was essentially saying, "Move over, Paris and Rome. There's a new cultural kid on the block." However, for all her grand visions of a modern Russia, Catherine's reign was built on older, more feudal foundations. Her economic policies straddled the line between innovation and preservation of the status quo, maintaining serfdom while trying to modernize agriculture and industry. It was a bit like trying to install a new operating system on a computer that still runs on dial-up. The charter to the nobility of 1785 gave new privileges to the aristocracy, but the serfs remained shackled, quite literally, to their land. It was a political compromise, a nod to the realities of maintaining power in a vast and diverse empire. Now, let's wade into the murky waters of myth, where the line between truth and legend is blurrier than a Monet painting. Catherine's personal life has attracted more gossip than a Hollywood tabloid, with tales of numerous lovers and scandalous escapades. While she did have several high-profile relationships, these were often as strategic as they were romantic. Her partnerships with influential men like Grigory Potemkin weren't just affairs of the heart. They were alliances that strengthened her political hand. But the most infamous myth, the one about the horse, is pure fabrication, a slanderous story cooked up by her enemies. It's a salacious tale that persists because, let's face it, people love a juicy scandal, no matter how untrue. Catherine's foreign policy, meanwhile, was a masterclass in realpolitik. Her expansion into Crimea and the territories of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth wasn't just about land grabbing. It was a strategic necessity for an empire hemmed in by powerful neighbors. The annexation of Crimea in 1783 was a geopolitical coup, securing a warm-water port for the Russian Navy and a foothold in the Black Sea. It was the 18th century equivalent of securing prime real estate, and Catherine played the game with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. But the human cost of these expansions, displacement, conflict, and the redrawing of borders, was immense. The partitions of Poland, in particular, were a brutal reminder that the political chessboard often left little room for compassion. Yet, despite the myths and the realities, Catherine's rule undeniably set the stage for modern Russia. Her reign laid the groundwork for the reforms of the 19th century and the cultural renaissance that followed. She was a ruler who understood the power of image and the necessity of progress, even if that progress was often incremental. By the time she died in 1796, Catherine had transformed Russia into a formidable European power, leaving a legacy that would endure long after her reign. In wrapping up the saga of Catherine the Great, it's clear that her life and reign were as complex as they were extraordinary. She was a woman who defied the odds, navigating the treacherous waters of Russian politics with intelligence, charm, and a healthy dose of pragmatism. Her story is one of ambition and resilience, of a ruler who dared to dream big in a world where the stakes were as high as the Siberian sky. So, as we close this chapter of history, let's raise a glass to Catherine the Great, a woman whose legacy is as multifaceted as a Fabergé egg, a blend of brilliance and imperfection that continues to fascinate us to this day. Her reign was a dance between the ideals of the Enlightenment and the harsh realities of power, a testament to the enduring complexity of human ambition. And if history has taught us anything, it's that the stories we tell about the past are as much about who we are as they are about what happened. So, here's to Catherine, the empress who knew the value of a good story and the power of a lasting legacy. It's a chilly December morning in 1845, and while most of us today might be hitting snooze, a young Victorian factory child named Tom is already awake, facing a day that makes a 9-to-5 look like a spa retreat. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, cranking out textiles and transforming economies faster than you can say, laissez-faire. And Tom's about to dive headfirst into its gritty, smoke-filled chaos. Tom's day begins in a cramped tenement building where personal space is about as rare as a day off. The air is thick with the smell of coal, because who needs clean air when you can have industrial progress, right? Breakfast is a humble affair, consisting of whatever scraps his family can muster. Porridge, maybe, but on the good days. More often, it's a slice of bread with a generous spread of imagination. Milk, only if you're feeling particularly aristocratic. Now, why on earth would a child be up at the crack of dawn, gearing up for a 12-hour shift? Well, welcome to the Victorian era, where child labor wasn't just accepted, it was economically essential. The Industrial Revolution had parents sending their kids to work not just for the extra income, but because sometimes it was the only income. In 1840, about 1/5 of the workforce consisted of children, and for Tom's family, that tiny wage packet could mean the difference between eating and, well, not. With breakfast, a term we use loosely, down the hatch, Tom heads out into the streets of Manchester, where the fog is so thick you'd think nature had misplaced its glasses. The city is a bustling hub of industry, but it's also a smog-filled haven for respiratory issues. Good thing Victorian kids were built tough, or at least tough enough to survive the daily dash through this urban obstacle course. The streets are packed with factory workers, and the air buzzes with the collective shuffle of clogs and boots on cobblestone. There's no time to dilly-dally. Tardiness isn't just frowned upon, it's a punishable offense. Tom's factory is a good mile away, but forget about morning jogs for fitness. This is survival. The factory bell rings at 6:00 a.m. sharp, and if you're late, you might find yourself on the wrong end of a supervisor's stick. Now, let's talk economics. You might be wondering why these kids weren't at home waiting for Santa Claus instead of clocking in at the factory. The answer lies in the almighty pound sterling. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just an era of technological innovation. It was a period of economic upheaval. Families like Tom's were often large, and wages were low. In 1840, the average wage for a child was about 2 to 4 shillings a week, a pittance by today's standards, but crucial cash in a world where every penny counted. Christmas bonuses, forget it. Dickens might have sprinkled a bit of festive spirit into his novels, but for most workers, Christmas was just another workday. The idea of a holiday bonus was as foreign as the concept of child labor laws, which, by the way, didn't start to take shape until the Factory Act of 1833. Even then, enforcement was sketchy at best. It wasn't until the 1870 that meaningful reforms began to take hold, but that's a tale for another day. In this Dickensian reality, the harsh truth is that children like Tom were seen as just another cog in the industrial machine. Their small hands could maneuver the intricate machinery of the textile mills more easily than adult hands. Plus, they came with the added benefit of being cheaper and less likely to unionize. It's a win-win for the factory owner, if not exactly a victory for humanity. As Tom races through the streets, he's joined by a motley crew of fellow child workers, each one as determined as he is to make it to the factory on time. There's Mary, who's 9 and already has 2 years of factory experience under her belt. Then there's Billy, who's been working since he was 7, because nothing says childhood like a full-time job. This morning hustle is as much a part of their routine as the humming of the looms they'll soon be operating. The air is crisp, their breath visible in the chilly morning as they dodge horse-drawn carriages and navigate the maze of alleys leading to the factory. It's a scene that's more Dickensian than any Christmas carol, a real-life montage of resilience and necessity. And so, Tom and his friends arrive at the factory gates, just in time to hear the clang of the opening bell. The day is just beginning, but it's already been a marathon of determination and grit. It's a life that's tough, but for these kids, it's the only life they know. As they step inside, the hum of machinery grows louder, drowning out the world outside, a world where, ironically, the wheels of progress keep turning, powered by the small hands of children like Tom. Stepping into the factory was like entering another world, one where the air was thick with the clang of machinery and the smell of oil and sweat. Welcome to the Victorian factory floor, folks, where kids weren't just part of the workforce. They were practically part of the equipment. The machines themselves were marvels of industrial ingenuity, looming, clattering beasts that could weave cloth faster than any human hand. But let's not get too starry-eyed over technological progress. For every glittering success story of the industrial age, there's a grim reality lurking in the shadows, and it's usually got a kid's name on it. Tom finds himself in the spinning room, a cacophony of noise that made the streets of Manchester seem like a tranquil escape. Imagine trying to hold a conversation next to a jet engine, and you're getting close. The deafening roar of spinning jennies and power looms is punctuated by the occasional shout from a supervisor, reminding Tom and his pint-sized colleagues that silence is golden, unless, of course, it's the silence of a machine that stopped working. Then all bets are off, and someone's getting an earful. Now, let's talk about the charming myth that these factories were somehow a nurturing ground for young minds. If by nurturing you mean instilling a fear of missing quotas and an unhealthy appreciation for punctuality, then sure. But in reality, it was a grueling grind. The Factory Act of 1833 was supposed to limit the working hours of children, but like a lot of good ideas, it was more of a suggestion than a rule. Inspectors were few and far between, and enforcement was about as strict as a Victorian parent who'd had won too many sherries. Children like Tom worked upwards of 12 hours a day, with barely a break in sight. Forget about lunch hours filled with leisurely chats and sandwiches. Think more along the lines of a quick bite of bread between shifts, if you were lucky. And speaking of luck, if you managed to avoid injury, you were doing better than most. Those nimble fingers that made kids so valuable also made them vulnerable. Around 1830, it was estimated that nearly 60% of workers in carton mills were under 18, and accidents were as common as coal dust in the air. Fingers, hands, and limbs were lost to the relentless pull of machinery, turning every workday into a high-stakes game of chance. Ah, but the Victorian era wasn't all doom and gloom, right? Surely there were moments of levity, perhaps a festive carol sung amongst the looms. Not quite. The soundscape of a factory was more likely to feature the rhythmic thud of machinery and the occasional shout of a foreman than the dulcet tones of "God rest ye merry, gentlemen." In fact, the idea of any sort of merriment was as foreign as child labor laws with actual teeth. And let's not forget the air quality, a delightful mix of soot, smoke, and lint, a concoction that would make any modern health inspector faint. Respiratory issues were as much a part of life as, well, work itself. The irony of the Industrial Revolution was that it promised progress, but often delivered the opposite, at least in terms of living conditions. It's little wonder that life expectancy in cities like Manchester was under 40 years in the mid-19th century. Economic progress. Sure, if you were a factory owner or an entrepreneur riding the wave of industrialization. For the average worker, it was a bit of a different story. Wages were low, and the cost of living was high, much like today, only without the hopeful promise of a weekend. Remember, the benefits of the industrial era weren't exactly evenly distributed. The wealth generated by factories and mills often stayed in the hands of those who owned them, while workers like Tom and his family scraped by on the margins. The Victorian era is often remembered as a time of progress and innovation, and it certainly was, but it was also a time when the human cost of that progress was often swept under the proverbial rug, a rug likely produced in a factory by the very hands we're talking about. Romantic notions of Dickensian Christmases and bustling streets filled with joyous workers might make for a good story, but the truth is far grittier. As the day drags on, Tom and his fellow workers move like clockwork, each child performing tasks as precisely as the machines they tend to. It's a dance of survival, a routine so ingrained that it becomes second nature. And while the world outside might be preparing for the festive season, inside the factory, it's just another day. The Christmas cheer, if it exists at all, is a quiet hope for a brighter future, a wish whispered under the din of industry. So, what's the takeaway here? Progress isn't always pretty. The Victorian factory was a place of both marvel and misery, a testament to human ingenuity and, simultaneously, a monument to exploitation. As the machines roared on, powered by steam and sweat, they wove not just textiles but the complex fabric of an era, a fabric made up of countless stories like Tom's. And while the wheels of progress never stop turning, it's worth remembering those who kept them moving, often at great personal cost. But don't worry, Tom's day isn't over yet. There's more to unravel about this world, where the past meets the future in a haze of smoke and ambition. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll continue to delve into the gritty reality of Victorian life, one spinning jenny at a time. And so, as the machines continue their relentless chorus, let's shift our gaze to a moment of respite, or rather, the lack thereof. Welcome to the Victorian lunch break, a term so generous it might just qualify for sainthood. For young Tom and his fellow factory dwellers, lunch amounted to whatever they could cram into their pockets before sprinting to work. Picture a crust of bread, a sliver of cheese if the stars aligned, or maybe a leftover potato. A hearty meal by Victorian standards was about as plausible as finding a unicorn grazing outside the factory gates. You see, Victorian nutrition wasn't exactly the stuff of gourmet dreams. It was all about survival, not savoring. For families like Tom's, living on a shoestring budget was the norm. Fresh fruits and vegetables, forget it. Those were luxuries reserved for the well-heeled, not for those toiling in the shadow of the smokestacks. In 1840, the average wage for a young factory worker was barely enough to cover the basics, let alone anything resembling a balanced diet. The harsh reality is that the Industrial Revolution, while a boon for machinery and innovation, didn't do wonders for the working-class diet. Nutritional deficiencies were as common as the soot that blackened the skies. Rickets, scurvy, and other maladies were frequent visitors to the homes of the working poor. Protein was a rare guest at the table, often making an appearance only in the form of rancid meat, or, for the adventurous, offal. When your daily menu reads like a Dickensian horror story, you know you're in gastronomic purgatory. And then there's the Christmas feast, or the lack thereof. While the upper crust might have indulged in a lavish spread, complete with roast goose, plum pudding, and enough brandy to float a battleship, the common folk made do with whatever scraps they could scrounge. Figgy pudding, more like figment pudding, because the odds of seeing one were slimmer than a factory child's waistline. For Tom and his kin, Christmas dinner could mean an extra slice of bread, or, if fortune smiled, a scrap of meat. It was less about celebrating and more about not starving. But here's where the myth gets intriguing. The romanticized version of a Victorian Christmas, filled with merry carolers and jolly festivities, does have a kernel of truth, just not for everyone. Charles Dickens, ever the champion of the underdog, helped shape this vision with works like A Christmas Carol, casting a warm glow over an otherwise bleak reality. Yet the real-life Cratchits were far more likely to be found huddled around a meager hearth than celebrating a bountiful feast. Dickens gave us the ideal, but reality was often colder and hungrier. The disparity in holiday experiences was a reflection of the broader social chasm that defined the era. The burgeoning middle class, riding the coattails of industrial prosperity, began to embrace Christmas as a time of familial warmth and generosity. Meanwhile, the working poor, those who kept the wheels of industry turning, found themselves on the outside looking in, their holiday spirit more about endurance than enjoyment. And let's not forget the economic forces at play. The Victorian era was a time of great wealth creation, but that wealth was as unevenly distributed as it could get. Factory owners and industrialists reaped the rewards, while workers like Tom and his family bore the brunt of the system's inequities. The concept of trickle-down economics was about as effective as a sieve in a rainstorm. It's little wonder that labor movements began to gather steam in the latter half of the 19th century, driven by the stark contrasts between rich and poor. Yet, amidst this bleak landscape, there was a glimmer of resilience. Communities often banded together to share what little they had, creating a spirit of camaraderie that could withstand even the harshest conditions. These were the real heroes of the Victorian era, those who, despite facing insurmountable odds, managed to find slivers of joy in the simplest of things. The human spirit, it seems, was as indomitable as the machines they tended. As the factory day wears on, Tom's stomach growls in protest, a reminder that while the Industrial Revolution might have fueled economic growth, it often left the individual hungering for more than just sustenance. The promise of progress was a double-edged sword, cutting deeper into the lives of those who could least afford it. But for Tom, and countless others like him, this was life, harsh, unforgiving, and yet filled with moments of quiet determination. So, as the clock strikes the end of another grueling shift, Tom and his companions spill into the street, the cold air a brief respite from the factory's oppressive heat. Their day isn't over, but they carry with them the hope of a better tomorrow, a hope as fragile as the bread they'll break for dinner. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this industrial tapestry, where every story is woven with the grit and grace of those who lived it. As Tom and his companions spill into the street, a cold breeze wraps around them like a threadbare blanket, momentarily cutting through the factory's oppressive heat. But let's not get too cozy. It's time to dive back into the Victorian grind, where afternoon shifts are as relentless as a Dickensian plot twist. The afternoon in the factory isn't exactly a holiday special. Productivity might as well be a ghost of Christmas past, waning as fatigue sets in. The clatter of machines is met with the sluggish rhythm of tired limbs. If the morning was a symphony of industry, the afternoon is more like a dirge. Yet these kids push through, driven by necessity, not choice. Remember, a measly 2 to 4 shillings a week is on the line here, and every penny counts when you're living on a knife's edge of poverty. Now, let's talk Dickens. Charles Dickens wasn't just spinning yarns. He was weaving social commentary straight into his narratives. Books like Oliver Twist and Hard Times didn't just entertain, they shone a glaring light on the industrial age's grim realities. Dickens was the 19th century equivalent of a viral tweet, calling out societal injustices with a flourish of his quill. His influence permeated the social conscience, fueling early reform movements that were as much about saving childhood as they were about saving Christmas. Because, believe it or not, there was a time when Christmas was in danger of becoming just another workday, a fate worse than finding coal in your stocking. Reformers like Lord Shaftesbury campaigned tirelessly to reduce child labour and improve working conditions, wielding Dickensian tales as both sword and shield. The Factory Act of 1833 might have been a first step, but it was more like a toddler's tentative stride than a giant leap. Enforcement was, shall we say, ambitious, and inspectors were rarer than a white Christmas in July. Still, it laid the groundwork for future reforms, like the 10 Hours Act of 1847, which aimed to reduce working hours, albeit with all the urgency of a snail on vacation. As the afternoon drags on, the reality of the factory floor grinds away at any semblance of holiday cheer. The idea that factories were bustling hives of seasonal joy is as fictional as Scrooge's ghostly visitors. Sure, some factory owners threw in a sprig of holly or strung up a garland, but it was window dressing at best. The true decorations were the layers of soot and grime that coated every surface. This is where the myth-busting takes center stage. The Victorian Christmas, cue the sound of sleigh bells, was often a tale told by those who didn't have to work through it. For many, it was a day like any other, punctuated by the relentless tick of the clock and the hum of spinning jennies. The holiday spirit was more about endurance than enjoyment, a silent hope for a better future wrapped in the cold, hard present. And speaking of hope, let's not forget the burgeoning labor movements that were beginning to stir. The Chartists, for instance, were agitating for political reforms, including votes for working-class men. Because why should aristocrats have all the fun? Their demands for fairer representation and better working conditions were the seeds of change, planted in soil rich with discontent. These movements were fueled by the stark contrasts of the era, wealth and poverty, opulence and deprivation, the haves and the have-nots. It's a tale as old as time, and one that Dickens captured with uncanny clarity. He didn't just write stories. He offered a mirror to society, reflecting both its triumphs and its failings. Yet amidst the grinding gears of industry, there was still a glimmer of resilience. Communities leaned on each other, sharing what little they had, finding moments of joy in the simplest things. A shared meal, a kind word, a fleeting smile. It was a camaraderie born of necessity, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could shine through. As Tom navigates the afternoon shift, his small hands deftly tending to the machines, he's part of a story much larger than himself. It's a story of survival and perseverance, of hopes pinned on progress that often felt as elusive as a snowflake in July. The wheels of industry turned on, powered by steam, sweat, and the dreams of those who kept them moving. So, as the afternoon sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows on the cobbled streets, Tom and his fellow workers press on. Their day isn't over yet, and neither is our journey through this industrial tapestry. There's more to unravel about this world where past and future collide in a haze of ambition and adversity. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll dive deeper into the lives of those who lived and survived the Victorian era, one spinning jenny at a time. As the last echoes of the factory's cacophony fade into the evening air, Tom and his fellow workers spill into the streets, their faces etched with the fatigue of another grueling day. The brisk December air is both a slap and a salve, rousing weary bodies for the trek home. You might think there's no place like home until you've seen a Victorian tenement, a marvel of cramped quarters and questionable plumbing. Our young worker has a mile to cover before he can even think about resting his weary limbs. But this isn't just any walk. It's a journey through the heart of industrial Manchester, where the streets are as lively as a Dickensian novel and as grimy as a chimney sweep's apron. The cobblestones are slick with a mix of soot and something that could generously be called mud, and the air is thick with the smell of industry, a scent that's all too familiar. Tom's route home is a tapestry of sounds and sights, a living tableau of the era's contradictions. On one corner, a street vendor hawks roasted chestnuts, their aroma mingling with the coal smoke to create an olfactory experience that's as confusing as it is nostalgic. On another, a group of carolers braves the cold, their voices rising in a hopeful refrain that echoes off the soot-stained buildings. It's a scene that captures the Victorian Christmas spirit, equal parts hope and hardship, with a dash of good old-fashioned grit. Back home, the family gathers in their tiny living space, a room that serves as kitchen, bedroom, and living area, all rolled into one. The hearth is the room's heart, and on this particular evening it burns a little brighter, turning up the dial on the meager warmth it offers. There's no grand feast waiting for them, just a modest meal of bread and maybe a bit of cheese if luck's been kind. Dinner conversation is sparse, but there's a quiet camaraderie in shared hardship, a bond forged in the fires of necessity. Now, let's tackle the myth of the lavish Victorian Christmas. Picture a scene from a holiday card, a grand table laden with roast meats, plum puddings, and enough brandy to make even the sternest Victorian loosen their corset. That's the dream, but for families like Tom's, reality was far more humble. The truth is, most working-class families made do with what they had, which wasn't much. A Christmas dinner might feature a bit of meat, likely stretched with a generous helping of imagination, and maybe, just maybe, a pudding if the budget allowed. It's a feast that might not impress Charles Dickens, but it was more than enough to foster a sense of togetherness. The evening brings a rare moment of respite, a chance for the family to gather around the hearth and share in the season's modest joys. It's a time for stories, perhaps a song or two, and definitely a moment to reflect on the year that's passed. Amidst the laughter and the flickering firelight, there's a sense of hope, a belief that things might just get better, even if tomorrow comes with another 12-hour shift. And what about those cozy Victorian traditions we all love? Well, they weren't quite as widespread as holiday specials would have you believe. The Christmas tree, for instance, didn't become a household staple until Queen Victoria's reign was well underway, popularized by a royal illustration in 1848. Before that, you were more likely to find a Yule log or a sprig of mistletoe than a fully decked-out fir. But even amidst the sparse decorations and the simple fare, there's an undeniable charm to the Victorian Christmas. It's a charm rooted not in opulence, but in resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to find light in the darkest of times. These small victories, these moments of grace, are what truly defined the era for those who lived it. Now, let's not kid ourselves about the broader picture. The Victorian age was a time of immense social and economic upheaval, where the gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the River Thames. The Industrial Revolution brought progress, sure, but it also brought exploitation, with families like Tom's bearing the brunt of its growing pains. Yet, these harsh realities also sowed the seeds of change. The working class began to find its voice, demanding better conditions and more equitable treatment, a movement that would eventually lead to the labor reforms of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In reflecting on this era, it's crucial to acknowledge both the progress it spurred and the cost at which it came. The Victorian age was a crucible, forging the modern world in a furnace of sweat and steam. While we celebrate the innovations that emerged from it, steam engines, railways, the very fabric of our modern society, we must also remember the countless Toms and Marys who powered that change with their labor. As Tom's family settles into their evening routine, the warmth of the hearth casts long shadows on the walls, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always a flicker of light. The Victorian Christmas, with all its contradictions, is a testament to human resilience, a reminder that, no matter the circumstances, we find ways to celebrate life and each other. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, think of Tom and the countless others who paved the way for the world we know today. Their stories are woven into the tapestry of history, a complex pattern of triumphs and trials that continues to shape our present. And as the embers glow softly in the hearth, let's remember that even the smallest light can cast the longest shadow, illuminating the path forward, one step at a time. If you ever felt a twinge of nostalgia for the Victorian era, it might be time for a little reality check. Picture yourself as a Victorian child laborer. Actually, scratch that. Let's not romanticize the grimy, back-breaking reality. This journey isn't for the faint-hearted, and trust me, you're going to need some elbow grease. The Industrial Revolution was like an all-consuming beast, demanding more and more fuel, and by fuel, I mean people. And not just any people, small, nimble, and cheap. Enter, you the Victorian child laborer. So how did you end up here, you ask? Well, the 19th century economic boom was a bit like a wild party that you didn't RSVP to, but somehow ended up at anyway. The Industrial Revolution swept across Britain like a hyperactive toddler with a new toy, and that toy was industrial machinery. Spinning jennies, power looms, and steam engines, Oh my, these shiny new inventions needed operators, and not just any operators. They needed small hands that could maneuver easily in tight spaces. Welcome to your new job description. Now, let's talk numbers, because this isn't just about how it felt. It's about hard, cold facts. By 1861, over 36% of Britain's population was under the age of 15. That's a staggering number of potential workers, or as factory owners saw it, a gold mine of cheap labor. And cheap is the operative word here. You'd be lucky to earn a measly 10 to 20 pence a week, barely enough to buy a loaf of bread. Meanwhile, those shiny machines were churning out profits faster than you could say child exploitation. But why children? Why not just employ adults? Well, adults had this pesky habit of demanding higher wages and better working conditions. You, on the other hand, were seen as pliable and less likely to rock the boat. Plus, let's face it, your small stature made you ideal for crawling under machinery and fixing jams. It was a dangerous game of hide and seek, except the stakes were life and limb. In fact, it's estimated that in 1833, more than half of the workers in some factories were under the age of 13. It's like the world's worst bring-your-child-to-work day, every day. The shift from the serene agrarian life to the chaotic world of factory work was nothing short of dizzying. One day you're frolicking in fields, the next you're inhaling lungfuls of soot and carton dust. The idyllic countryside was being swapped for grimy urban centers at an alarming rate. Cities like Manchester and Birmingham became industrial powerhouses almost overnight. By 1851, for the first time in British history, more people lived in cities than in rural areas. Talk about a seismic shift. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. This wasn't about giving you a head start in the workforce or teaching you the value of hard work. This was about survival, plain and simple. Your family needed every penny you could bring in. With the average family earning barely enough to scrape by, children working in factories was less a choice and more a necessity. The relentless march of industrialization didn't leave room for sentimentality. Now, you might be tempted to imagine these factories as bustling hubs of innovation and progress. But let's be real, they were more akin to Dickensian nightmares. Long hours, check. Hazardous conditions, double check. The typical workday stretched from sunrise to sunset, sometimes clocking in at a brutal 12 to 14 hours. And the conditions? Well, let's just say health and safety regulations weren't exactly top of mind. With machinery that could maim or kill, and supervisors who enforced discipline with an iron fist, it was a life on the edge. Despite all this, there's a certain mythos about the Victorian era, a kind of rose-tinted glasses view that often glosses over these harsh realities. Sure, it was a time of great innovation and empire building, but it was also a time when the cost of progress was borne on the backs of the young and vulnerable. It's a classic case of the legend overshadowing the lived experience. The Victorians gave us steam engines and railways, but they also perfected the art of turning a blind eye to suffering. Let's not forget the little details, the ones that bring the full picture into focus. Like the fact that in 1842, a report found that children as young as 5 were working underground in coal mines, tasked with opening and closing ventilation doors for a few pennies a day. Or that in textile factories, the air was so thick with cotton fibers that lung disease ran rampant. These aren't just footnotes. They're stark reminders of the human cost of industrial progress. And while we're busting myths, let's tackle the idea that child labor was some kind of societal oversight quickly rectified. Reform was a slow and grudging process. The Factory Act of 1833 was a step in the right direction, but it only limited work hours for children aged 9 to 13 to a mere 48 hours a week. Talk about setting the bar low. It wasn't until the latter half of the century that real change took hold, and even then it was a hard-won battle. So, as you sit there, covered in soot and sweat, remember that you're part of a massive machine, one that's reshaping society in ways both awe-inspiring and terrifying. You're not just a cog in the wheel, you're the very lifeblood of this industrial age. It's a time of extraordinary change, but it comes with a price tag that few are willing to acknowledge. Welcome to the Victorian era, where progress and exploitation walk hand in hand. As you wipe the soot off your brow, and take a deep breath of that oh-so-fresh industrial air, let's dive deeper into the coal mines and textile mills. the two circles of hell that Victorian children knew all too well. You see, the Industrial Revolution wasn't just about fancy machines and economic growth. It was also about survival of the fittest, with a side of social Darwinism that excused a lot of sins. Imagine starting your day before the sun even thinks about making an appearance. The rooster hasn't crowed, but you're already headed to the mines, your candle flickering in the damp, dark tunnel. Aged maybe 6 or 7, you might be a trapper, one of the youngest jobs, responsible for opening and closing ventilation doors deep underground. It's a job that sounds simple until you remember you're doing it in complete darkness for up to 12 hours. Your reward, a staggering half a shilling a week, which is about as useful as a chocolate teapot when it comes to feeding your family. And the dangers, oh, they're as plentiful as the coal itself. First, there's the constant threat of cave-ins, which, let's face it, is a tad more serious than forgetting to back up your files. Then there's the gas, carbon monoxide, to be precise, an invisible menace that can turn a productive day into a deadly one in no time flat. Explosions were a regular feature, too. In 1862, the Hartley Colliery disaster claimed the lives of 204 men and boys when the beam of the mine's engine broke, cutting off the escape route. So, not exactly your average day at the office. If you were slightly older, say 9 or 10, you might end up as a hurrier, dragging carts of coal through these claustrophobic passages. With a chain fastened around your waist, you'd crawl on all fours, pulling a cart that weighed more than a small car. This wasn't just physically demanding, it was soul-crushing. The irony, the very coal you dug out powered the factories that churned out the goods of the burgeoning British Empire. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Now, let's take a breather from the mines and wander into the textile mills, where the air is thick with cotton fluff and the hum of machinery drowns out any thought of an idyllic childhood. The work here was slightly more above ground, but just as grueling. From the moment you were tall enough to reach the machines, you were fair game for the mill owners. You'd start off as a scavenger, tasked with picking up loose cotton from beneath the machines while they were still running. One misstep and you'd end up with a few less fingers, or worse. And the hours, oh, they stretched on like a bad movie with no end credits in sight. 14-hour workdays were standard, with only a short break for lunch, which often consisted of stale bread and water. You'd earn around 5 shillings a week, a princely sum that translated into about £25 in today's money. Barely enough to cover the cost of living, let alone save for that dream Victorian holiday to Blackpool. Of course, the mills weren't just a test of endurance. They were a test of your immune system. With no ventilation, the air was filled with lint, which found its way into your lungs, leading to a delightful condition known as mill fever. Chronic coughs and respiratory illnesses were par for the course. And let's not even get started on the deafening noise from the machines, which could leave you with a permanent ringing in your ears. But let's not forget the human element here, the overseers who kept the wheels turning, often with a liberal use of physical discipline. The Factory Act of 1833 might have limited the hours children could work, but it didn't stop the use of the strap or the rod to keep you in line. Imagine doing your job with the threat of a beating hanging over you like a dark cloud. And why did society let this happen? Well, the Victorian era was a time of contradictions. On one hand, it was an age of moral righteousness and reform. On the other, there was a belief that hard work built character, no matter how small the hands doing it. The notion of childhood as we know it today didn't exist. Children were seen as mini-adults, expected to contribute to the household income as soon as they were able. Yet amid these grim realities, there's a reason the myth of the industrious Victorian child persists. It's a story of resilience and grit in the face of adversity, a narrative that conveniently glosses over the exploitation and suffering. It's the stuff of inspirational quotes and motivational posters, but it's also a convenient way to sidestep the uncomfortable truth about how progress was achieved. And while we're dissecting myths, let's talk about the idea that this was all a necessary evil, a stepping stone on the path to modernity. Sure, the Industrial Revolution brought unprecedented economic growth and technological advancement, but at what cost? The price was paid in the form of a generation of children whose lives were sacrificed on the altar of progress. It's a sobering thought, one that makes you question the very foundations of the society that allowed it to happen. As you navigate this gritty labyrinth of coal dust and cotton fibers, Remember that you're not just part of an economic machine, you're part of a social experiment, one that's still unfolding. The Victorian era was a time of great change, but it was also a time of great inequality. The shadows of those factory walls stretch long into history, reminding us of the price paid for the comforts we often take for granted today. So, as we wrap up this slice of your Victorian day, remember that this isn't just ancient history. The echoes of those child laborers resonate today as we continue to grapple with issues of exploitation and inequality worldwide. The story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to confront. But for now, take a well-deserved break, because tomorrow the factory whistle will blow, and it'll be time to do it all over again. And just like that, the factory whistle pierces the dawn, calling you back to the grind. But today, we're shifting gears, diving into a saga that's as juicy as any Victorian melodrama, the legislative battle to save the children. Spoiler alert, it's not as heroic as it sounds. Enter the Factory Acts of the 1830s and 1840, society's clumsy first steps towards acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, having 6-year-olds operate heavy machinery wasn't the best idea. The first major act, the Factory Act of 1833, was supposed to be a game changer. It decreed that children aged 9 to 13 could only work a mere 48 hours a week, and those aged 14 to 18 were capped at 69 hours. Some might call this progress. Others might call it a half-hearted attempt to put lipstick on a pig. The act also required factory owners to provide schooling 2 whole hours a day. This was less about creating budding scholars and more about ticking a legislative box. After all, knowledge is power, but only if you can stay awake long enough to learn it after a 14-hour shift. But before we start imagining Parliament as a bastion of child welfare, let's peek behind the velvet curtains. The Factory Acts were the result of intense lobbying by reformers like Lord Shaftesbury, a man whose compassion for the working class was as rare as a sunny day in Manchester. Yet for every Shaftesbury, there were 10 industrialists clutching their pearls and profits, claiming that child labour was the backbone of the British economy. And who could blame them? Those child-sized wages were a capitalist's dream. The debates in Parliament were less about noble intentions and more about economic arm wrestling. Consider this. By 1835, textiles made up nearly 40% of Britain's exports. Limiting child labour was akin to turning off the money printer. So, the reformers had to get creative, framing their argument as a moral crusade. They painted a picture of Britain as a nation of Dickensian nightmares, with children slaving away while the rich sipped tea and discussed the weather. As the laws passed, enforcement became the next battle. The Factory Act of 1833 did introduce inspectors, 4 of them. Yes, 4, to cover every factory in the country. That's like trying to mop up the ocean with a sponge. These inspectors were supposed to ensure compliance, but with such a skeletal crew, it was more like a game of industrial whack-a-mole. Factory owners found loopholes faster than you could say child exploitation, employing children under different guises, or simply cooking the books to make it all look above board. And then there were the parents. For many families, sending their children to work wasn't a choice. It was a financial lifeline. The law might say one thing, but an empty stomach said another. Parents often colluded with employers, forging age certificates, or turning a blind eye to illegal practices. It was a grim game of survival, where the rules were written in desperation. The Factory Act of 1844 tried to tighten the screws, reducing working hours for women and children, and making education compulsory for half the day. But again, enforcement was as sparty as Victorian hygiene. Employers simply adjusted, finding ways to keep the kids on the payroll while technically abiding by the law. And the education provided, let's just say it wasn't exactly Oxford material. Reading, writing, and arithmetic were taught, but in overcrowded, underfunded classrooms where the teacher was often one of the older kids. Meanwhile, public opinion was a mixed bag. Some saw these acts as a necessary step toward a more humane society. Others saw them as an attack on the British way of life, where hard work was synonymous with virtue. After all, wasn't pulling yourself up by your bootstraps the Victorian mantra? The child labour laws were wrapped up in the broader social reforms of the era, from the abolition of slavery to the push for universal male suffrage. It was a time of upheaval, where old norms were being challenged, but not always successfully. And then there's the myth of the benevolent factory owner who cared for his workers like a father. Sure, there were a few, like Robert Owen, who ran his mills in New Lanark with a focus on community welfare. But these were exceptions, not the rule. Most industrialists were more concerned with the bottom line than the well-being of their workforce. It's the classic tale of capitalism versus compassion, and in this era, capitalism was winning by a mile. So, did these laws change anything? Yes, but not in the way you might think. They laid the groundwork for future reforms, like the 10-Hour Act of 1847, which further reduced working hours. But real change was slow, a marathon, not a sprint. It wasn't until the Education Act of 1870 that the idea of universal schooling began to take hold, finally prizing children out of factories and into classrooms. Even then, the transition was fraught with resistance and setbacks. The Victorian era was a time of contradictions, where progress and regression danced an awkward waltz. On one hand, the Industrial Revolution propelled Britain to the forefront of global power. On the other, it exposed the deep fissures in society, where the divide between rich and poor was as wide as the River Thames. Legislation like the Factory Acts was a band-aid on a gaping wound, a well-intentioned but inadequate response to a systemic issue. And here's where we find the heart of the matter. The struggle for child labor reform wasn't just about laws or factories. It was about redefining what it meant to be a child in a rapidly changing world. The Victorian era laid the foundation for this shift, but it was a foundation built on the backs of those who had no voice in the matter. As we wrap up today's chapter, keep in mind that history isn't a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a tapestry of intentions, actions, and consequences, where heroes and villains often wear the same hat. The fight against child labor was a messy, complex battle that left no party unscathed. And while it might seem like a distant memory, its echoes resonate in our modern world, reminding us that the fight for justice and equality is never truly over. So, as the factory whistle fades into the distance, remember that you're part of a story still being written. The past is never truly past, and the lessons of the Victorian era continue to shape our present and future. Stay tuned, because the story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more myths to bust, and more truths to confront. The Victorian saga is far from over, and next time, we'll dive deeper into the social and economic forces that made this era one of the most transformative and turbulent in history. Turning the page from legislative skirmishes, let's dive into the everyday reality of being a Victorian child laborer. It's a tale of balancing acts, where you juggle work, non-existent education, and the skeletal remains of what we'd call a childhood. Spoiler alert, it's not a fairy tale ending. In an era where the phrase childhood leisure was as foreign as Wi-Fi, these young workers were thrust into a relentless cycle of toil that would make even Sisyphus raise an eyebrow. Picture the life of a child worker. You wake up in the pre-dawn gloom, not to the scent of breakfast, but to the clamor of factory bells. School, a distant dream for most. By 1850, only about 20% of children in Britain received any formal education, a statistic that makes modern truancy rates look like a victory parade. Instead of honing your ABCs, you honed your survival skills in workplaces where you were as much a fixture as the machinery. Education, or the tragic lack thereof, was a luxury few could afford. The Factory Acts tried to shoehorn schooling into these children's lives, but let's be real. A couple of hours of haphazard lessons, sandwiched between grueling shifts, didn't exactly prepare you for higher academia. The long-term effects were as predictable as they were devastating. Illiteracy rates were sky-high, with nearly half of the working-class population unable to read or write by mid-century. It wasn't just a lack of schooling, it was a societal blind spot that kept the underprivileged firmly underfoot. Home life wasn't much of a sanctuary either. The Industrial Revolution didn't just churn out goods, it churned up family dynamics like a blender on high speed. With both parents and children working dawn till dusk, the traditional family structure was more fragmented than a jigsaw puzzle missing several key pieces. Family meals, more like stolen moments, hastily garbled between shifts, if you were lucky. It's no wonder that familial bonds were often stretched thinner than a Victorian lace dress. The psychological toll was the elephant in the room that no one wanted to acknowledge. Imagine being thrust into adulthood before you've even lost your milk teeth. The myth of the happy child worker is as convincing as claiming Victorian London had pristine air quality. Sure, there were tales of camaraderie among young workers, but these were often thin veils over the grim reality of exploitation and exhaustion. For every story of a child finding a friend in the factory, there were countless untold tales of loneliness and despair. And the health impacts, they were as ghastly as you might expect when your daily environment involved coal dust, carbon fibers, and the relentless clatter of machines. Tuberculosis, lung diseases, and stunted growth were as common as the fog in London. By the time they reached their 20s, many of these child labourers had the bodies of people twice their age, worn down by years of hard labour and scant nourishment. It's like rushing headlong into old age with no pit stops along the way. The societal impacts of child labour were far-reaching. Economically, it was a short-term boon, but a long-term bust. Sure, having a cheap, pliable workforce made the industrialists' pockets jingle with glee, but at what cost? A generation of workers was left undereducated and unhealthy, ill-prepared to contribute to society beyond the factory walls. The economic engine of the era ran on the fuel of youthful desperation, but it left a trail of human debris in its wake. Yet amid this bleakness, there's an insidious charm to the notion of industrious children contributing to the empire's glory. It's a narrative spun with the same thread that romanticizes the good old days, while conveniently forgetting the grime and grit. The reality was far less poetic. Children weren't building character. They were being systematically stripped of it. They weren't learning the value of hard work. They were learning the harsh calculus of survival. This grim reality was slow to change, but change it did, eventually. The push for education reform gained momentum in the latter half of the century, with the Education Act of 1870 paving the way for compulsory schooling. It was a watershed moment, but it didn't happen overnight. Families still had to grapple with the harsh choice between sending their children to school or keeping them in the workforce to make ends meet. The Victorian era was rife with contradictions, and this was one of its most glaring. As we meander through this historical tapestry, it's essential to remember that these children weren't just numbers in a census or footnotes in a reformer's diary. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, and fears, living in a world that often treated them as little more than cogs in a vast industrial machine. The legacy of their struggle is woven into the fabric of modern labor laws and educational reforms, a testament to their endurance and sacrifice. The story of Victorian child labor is a cautionary tale, a reminder that progress often comes at a steep price. It's a chronicle of resilience in the face of adversity, a narrative that forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our past while shaping our future. As we delve into the social and familial impacts of this era, remember that history is more than dates and facts. It's the lived experiences of those who came before us, echoing through time with lessons still relevant today. So, as we pause to catch our breath in this whirlwind tour of Victorian childhood, keep in mind that the story is far from over. The next chapter promises more revelations, more myth-busting, and perhaps a glimmer of hope amid the darkness. Stay tuned, because the Victorian saga is a tale that demands to be heard, a reminder of where we've been and a guide to where we're headed. And so, as we pivot from the grim realities of Victorian child labour, let's shine a light on the forces that slowly, oh so slowly, began to chip away at this industrial nightmare. The decline of child labour wasn't a sudden epiphany or a burst of enlightenment. It was more like a reluctant shuffle toward decency, pushed along by a motley crew of reformers, technological wizards, and the growing rumble of the labour movement. Let's start with the labour movement, a rising tide that, even if it didn't immediately lift all boats, at least started poking holes in the status quo. By the mid-19th century, trade unions were gaining traction. Workers were beginning to realize that strength lay in numbers, and they weren't afraid to flex those collective muscles. The Chartists in the 1830 and 1840 didn't just want the vote. They wanted better working conditions, too. You see, they understood that political power and labor rights were two sides of the same coin. While the movement was primarily adult-driven, It set the stage for a society that increasingly questioned the morality of child labor. And then there were the social reformers, a ragtag bunch of moral crusaders who refused to turn a blind eye to the plight of working children. Figures like Lord Shaftesbury, who we've met before, campaigned tirelessly for labor reforms, often using the power of public opinion as their weapon of choice. They published reports and exposés that laid bare the conditions children faced, turning grim industrial realities into dinner-table conversations. The public was starting to see these child laborers not as mini-adults, but as vulnerable members of society in desperate need of protection. But let's not kid ourselves. The reformers weren't just driven by altruism. There was a pragmatic side to their crusade. Britain's burgeoning middle class was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the idea that their morning tea and biscuits were bought on the backs of exploited children. There was a growing awareness that a society built on such shaky moral ground might not be sustainable in the long run. The Victorian era was a time when moral righteousness and economic pragmatism began to awkwardly dance together. And let's give a nod to technology, the double-edged sword in this tale. The very machines that had once welcomed small hands for their dexterity became more sophisticated, requiring less human intervention. Mechanization began to reduce the need for manual labor, child-sized or otherwise. By the late 19th century, advancements in machinery meant that efficiency no longer relied on a swarm of tiny workers scurrying between the gears. The Education Act of 1870 was a game-changer, setting the stage for compulsory schooling. By 1880, school attendance was mandatory for children up to the age of 10, giving them a chance to swap factories for classrooms, albeit not without resistance. The act was a seismic shift, rooted in the belief that education could be the great equalizer, a noble sentiment that was also a strategic move to create a more skilled workforce. It was the dawn of the realization that investing in future generations could yield long-term economic benefits. By the time the Factory and Workshop Act of 1901 rolled around, the legal age for child labor had been pushed to 12, and the number of working hours for children had been further restricted. It was progress, albeit slow and incremental, much like trying to turn a steamship with a paddle. But these legislative changes were more than just ink on paper. They were signs of a society slowly waking up to the idea that children deserved something more than a childhood spent in the shadow of industry. The legacy of these young workers is a tapestry of hard-won rights and ongoing struggles. Their toil laid the groundwork for modern labor laws, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. But let's not sugarcoat it. While the Victorian era was a turning point, it wasn't the end of the road. The echoes of child labor still reverberate today, a haunting reminder that history has a way of repeating itself when we're not vigilant. Globally, the fight against child labor is far from over. According to the International Labour Organization, there are still over 150 million children engaged in child labor today. It's a sobering statistic, a modern echo of a Victorian past that we'd like to think we've left behind. The challenge now is to ensure that the lessons of the past aren't just footnotes in history books, but catalysts for continued progress. In reflecting on the legacy of Victorian child labor, we see a story of resilience and reform, a narrative that underscores the importance of vigilance and advocacy in the pursuit of justice. It's a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring belief that we can, and must, do better. As we turn the pages of history, the story of these young workers serves as a poignant reminder that progress is possible, but it requires the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and the conviction to act upon them. And there you have it, the Victorian saga of child labor, a cautionary tale that's as relevant today as it was over a century ago. It's a reminder that history is more than just a series of dates and events. It's a reflection of our values, our struggles, and our triumphs. So, as you tuck this knowledge away, remember that the fight for justice and equality is a continuous journey, one that demands our attention and our action. Until next time, keep those history books open and those critical thinking caps on, because the past has plenty more stories to tell. You crack open your eyes to the rhythmic clamor of a blacksmith's hammer echoing down the hill and the low hum of slaves shuffling through the corridors of your Roman villa. Welcome to the 1st century, where mornings greet you with the scent of olive oil and the not-so-gentle reminder that luxury comes with a live-in workforce. Time to peel yourself from your lectures. A bed so fancy, it might make your modern mattress feel like a pile of straw. Now, let's talk about your digs. The Roman villa isn't just a house. It's a statement, a sprawling testament to your social standing. You're not slumming it in a cramped insula like the hoi polloi in Rome. Nope, you're luxuriating in a rural palace, a veritable theme park of Roman architectural prowess. Your villa is designed with a precision that would make modern architects weep with envy. It's a complex maze of function and flair, starting with the atrium, the beating heart of the villa. This central courtyard isn't just for show. It's a multi-purpose space where you greet guests, flaunt your wealth, and occasionally conduct business deals over a cup of watered-down wine. The atrium is your personal stage, complete with an impluvium, a sunken basin to catch rainwater, because who needs plumbing when you have gravity? This architectural gem doubles as a conversation starter and a practical solution to water woes, a perfect marriage of utility and ostentation. Around the atrium, rooms fan out like spokes on a wheel. There's the tablinum, your home office, where you plot your next move up the social ladder, or, if you're feeling benevolent, manage your estate's finances. Let's be honest, though, not every Roman villa is a marble-clad wonderland. Sure, Augustus might have had his palace dripping in opulence, but most Romans were more likely to be living in villas that were less palatial estate and more rustic farmhouse. The myth of universal Roman luxury is just that, a myth. Many villas were modest affairs, built with local stone and decorated with frescoes that might have been more Picasso than Michelangelo. And speaking of costs, let's not forget the price tag. Building a villa could set you back a cool 2,000 to 3,000 sesterces, which, when adjusted for inflation, means you're looking at a price comparable to a decent-sized house in today's market. Not exactly pocket change. As you wander through your villa, you'll notice the strategic layout. The Romans were nothing if not practical. Bedrooms, or cubicula, are small and functional, situated away from the hubbub of the atrium to ensure a good night's sleep, or as close as you can get with the racket of daily life. The peristylium, a garden courtyard, offers a slice of tranquility and a space where you can contemplate the finer things in life, like why your neighbor's villa always seems just a tad more ostentatious than yours. Now, let's bust a myth. The idea that every Roman villa was a sanctuary of luxury and decadence. Sure, some were, but a lot of them were more akin to working farms than hedonistic retreats. Many villas doubled as production hubs, with olive presses or grape-treading vats tucked away in the back, turning your estate into a mini-economy. It's a reminder that even the wealthy had to keep an eye on the bottom line. After all, who's going to bankroll those bacchanalian feasts if the olive harvest fails? Yet, for all the effort that goes into maintaining this veneer of opulence, your villa is also a microcosm of Roman society itself, a place where social hierarchies are built into the very walls. The lavish triclinium, where you entertain guests, is designed to impress and intimidate, while the slaves' quarters, often hidden from view, remind you that the Roman way of life is built on the backs of many who toil unseen. The villa is a physical manifestation of power dynamics, a constant reminder of both your status and the price of maintaining it. So, as you start your day, taking in the sights and sounds of villa life, remember that each stone, each fresco, and each room is a testament to the complexities of Roman life. It's a world where opulence meets obligation, where every luxury has a cost, and where every morning begins with the realization that in Rome, nothing is quite as simple as it seems. But before you get too philosophical about the weight of Roman life, let's focus on something a bit more immediate: breakfast. Spoiler alert, forget your modern notions of a hearty morning meal. The Romans kicked off their day with a distinctly Spartan approach. The typical fare: bread dipped in olive oil. That's right, no eggs Benedict or bacon sizzling in the pan. The Roman breakfast, or intaculum, was a modest affair, usually just enough to keep you from gnawing on your own arm until lunch. Now, you might be wondering why the Romans, who were no strangers to excess when it came to dining, kept it so simple in the morning. It's all about economics and practicality. Bread was the staple food, the lifeblood of the Roman diet, made from wheat that was grown across the empire, from Gaul to Egypt. This wasn't your artisanal sourdough, mind you. It was a basic, hearty loaf meant to fill bellies, not win culinary awards. The olive oil, a staple of Mediterranean cuisine, was more than just a flavor enhancer. It was a symbol of trade and wealth, a liquid gold that fueled both lamps and bodies. For those with a bit more coin in their purse, the breakfast plate might include some cheese or fruit, figs, grapes, or whatever was in season. If you were really living large, a dollop of honey might sweeten the deal. But let's not kid ourselves, this wasn't the norm for everyone. The wealthier you were, the more likely your morning spread included such luxuries. For the average Roman, breakfast was all about getting on with the day. The economics of Roman food production were as complex as a modern supply chain, with grains and olive oil flowing into Rome from the far corners of the empire. The grain dole, or annona, was a way to placate the masses by distributing free or subsidized grain, ensuring that even the poorest citizens didn't starve. It was a shrewd political move, keeping the plebeians fed and less likely to revolt. You see, bread wasn't just bread. It was a tool of political stability, the ancient version of a welfare program. But let's not forget about fish sauce, or garum, the ketchup of the Roman world. Made by fermenting fish guts with salt, it sounds like something you'd avoid at all costs. Yet this pungent concoction was beloved, slathered on everything from bread to meat. Think of it as the Roman answer to umami, adding depth to dishes in a way that would make modern chefs nod in approval. A jar of the good stuff could set you back a few denarii, the equivalent of splurging on a fancy bottle of truffle oil today. While the wealthy indulged in garum imported from the finest producers in Spain, the lower classes made do with whatever they could scrounge up. For them, breakfast might be little more than a stale crust of bread, and a prayer that lunch would be more satisfying. It's a sobering reminder of the economic divides that permeated Roman society, where what you ate was a direct reflection of your place in the social hierarchy. And let's talk spices. Today we take them for granted, but in Rome, these were the exotic luxuries of the culinary world. Spices like pepper and cinnamon were imported from as far away as India, their journey a perilous expedition across land and sea. This wasn't just seasoning, it was a statement of status. A pinch of pepper on your morning bread was like sprinkling diamonds on your toast. The cost of these spices was exorbitant, often reserved for the wealthiest of banquets, an indulgence that highlighted the vast disparities in wealth. So, as you munch on your olive oil-drenched bread, consider the bigger picture. This humble breakfast is a microcosm of Roman society, a world where what you ate was dictated by your status, where the economics of food production were as tangled as the vines in your peristylium. The myth of the Roman feast, with its overflowing platters and bacchanalian excess, is only one side of the story. For many, the reality was far more mundane, a reminder that in the Roman Empire, even the simplest meal was a reflection of the complex web of trade, politics, and social structure that sustained it. In this world, breakfast wasn't just the most important meal of the day. It was a window into the soul of a civilization that thrived on contrasts, where opulence and austerity existed side by side, as intertwined as the mosaic tiles under your feet. And as you swallow the last bite, the day awaits, with all its promises and perils, beckoning you to step into the bustling streets of Rome, where history is not just a story, but a living, breathing tapestry. And so, with the last crumb of bread swallowed and the morning sun coaxing you out of contemplative musings, you step into your villa's garden, a slice of paradise that's both a personal sanctuary and a social statement. Forget the modern concept of a backyard with a grill and some lawn chairs. This is your very own Eden, meticulously crafted to flaunt both your wealth and your horticultural prowess. You see, in the Roman world, gardens weren't just about aesthetics. They were a public performance of private luxury. Owning a garden was like owning a piece of heaven, only this version came with a hefty maintenance fee. The elite didn't just want greenery. They wanted an exotic menagerie of flora that would make the neighbors green with envy. We're talking about everything from fragrant roses and violets to the more exotic imports like lilies and oleanders. These plants didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They were imported from all corners of the Roman Empire, a botanical testament to Rome's expansive reach. But before you get too lost in the floral fantasy, let's talk numbers. Maintaining such a verdant marvel wasn't for the faint of heart or wallet. The cost of a well-kept garden could run up to several hundred sesterces annually, not to mention the manpower required to keep it looking pristine. Enter the often romanticized, yet harshly real, world of Roman slavery. Roman slavery, often depicted as a somewhat benign institution in popular culture, with images of toga-clad slaves lounging about, feeding grapes to their masters. Spoiler alert, the reality was far less idyllic. Slaves in your villa are the engine room of this luxury cruise, and while the garden may be paradise for you, it's just another day at the grindstone for them. They prune, plant, and preen under the watchful eye of the villicus, the estate manager, who ensures that the garden remains an Edenic spectacle. In truth, these slaves are the unsung heroes of Roman horticulture. Without their labor, your garden might quickly devolve into a jungle. But let's not sugarcoat it. Roman slavery was brutal, with slaves often being worked to the bone, living in cramped quarters, and lacking the basic rights we take for granted today. And don't be fooled by the romanticized notion of the house slave as a privileged position. Sure, they might not be toiling in the fields, but they were still subject to the whims and fancies of their masters, their lives hanging by the thread of their owner's goodwill. This is where things get interesting and a bit uncomfortable. The Roman economy was heavily reliant on slave labor, much like how modern economies lean on low-wage workers to keep the wheels turning. It's a stark reminder that the backbone of luxury has often been the toil of the many for the benefit of the few. And just like today, where the service industry keeps our modern conveniences humming along, Roman slaves were the indispensable cogs in the grand machine of Roman opulence. As you meander through the manicured hedges and artfully arranged flower beds, you might start to ponder the social dynamics at play. Gardens were not just a place to relax, but a venue for social climbing. Lavish dinner parties, complete with reclining couches under pergolas, were a chance to impress your peers and potential patrons. The more exotic and well-maintained your garden, the higher the social cachet. It was less about the zen of gardening and more about the prestige of possession. And let's not forget the philosophical angle. For many Romans, gardens were a reflection of their philosophical leanings. Stoics might favor a more austere layout, while Epicureans would revel in the sensory delights of a lush, fragrant paradise. Your garden was a canvas for your worldview, a living testament to your intellectual pursuits. Even the peripatetic philosophers of old would wax lyrical about the virtues of a good garden stroll, claiming it was the perfect setting for contemplation and debate. So, as you walk through this horticultural haven, consider the layers of meaning embedded in every leaf and blossom. This garden is a microcosm of Roman society itself, a blend of beauty and brutality, prestige and pragmatism. It's a place where the lofty ideals of leisure and luxury are rooted in the gritty reality of labor and hierarchy. Each plant, each carefully raked path, carries with it the weight of history and the whispers of all those who have toiled to make it what it is. And as you exit the garden, leaving behind the heady mix of floral scents and philosophical musings, you're reminded that the day is just beginning. The villa awaits, with its intricate dance of power and politics, where every step and every interaction is a reminder of the complex tapestry that is Roman life. The garden might be a sanctuary, but beyond its walls, the real world beckons, a world where history is not just grown but lived, in all its messy, magnificent glory. As you stroll out of the garden's aromatic embrace, the Roman world unfurls before you like a bustling tapestry, woven with the threads of every ambition, anxiety, and anecdote of the age. Welcome to the Forum, the beating heart of Roman public life, where the pulse of the empire thrums loudest. Forget what you know about modern city centers. This is where the real action happens, from political machinations to the clamor of merchants hawking their wares. Navigating the streets of ancient Rome is a bit like playing a high-stakes game of Frogger, if Frogger involved dodging chariots and stepping over the latest market refuse. The Roman road network is legendary, literally. Those cobbled paths are so iconic they spawned the phrase, "all roads lead to Rome." And they weren't kidding. By the 1st century, Rome had over 400,000 kilometers of roads. That's about 249,000 miles for the imperially challenged. These roads connected the sprawling empire, from the windswept shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt, facilitating trade, troop movements, and the odd runaway drama. But let's pump the brakes on the romantic notion of silk-smooth highways. The reality? Well, think more medieval cobblestone than modern freeway. Roman roads were marvels of engineering, yes, with layers upon layers of stone, sand, and gravel creating a durable surface that's still around today. Yet they were also hard on the feet, hooves, and wheels of anyone plodding along them. The good news: you could traverse the empire at a blistering speed of 20 miles a day if you were on foot, 30 if you had a horse. So your cross-empire road trip was less the fast and the furious, and more the patient and the plodding. These roads were the veins through which the lifeblood of the empire flowed: economics, politics, and culture. They were the original information superhighway, with imperial couriers delivering messages across vast distances to ensure the emperor's writ ran large. And boy, did the emperor have a lot to say. Welcome to the Roman political scene, where emperors weren't just figureheads. They were the linchpin of everything from military campaigns to public works. Speaking of emperors, let's not forget the man of the hour, Emperor Augustus, the dude who turned Rome from a republic into an empire with the kind of finesse that would make even Machiavelli nod in approval. Augustus was the master of rebranding, turning his rule into an era of peace and prosperity, or the Pax Romana, as it's known. It was a time when the empire expanded to its zenith, and the streets of Rome were as likely to be filled with soldiers as they were with traders and philosophers. Augustus and his successors understood the power of propaganda better than a modern PR firm. They used public works, think aqueducts, temples, and yes, roads, as physical manifestations of imperial power. These projects weren't just about utility. They were about sending a clear message: Rome is eternal, and so is my legacy. But let's not forget, these gifts to the people were often funded by the very taxes that kept the citizenry in perpetual servitude to the state. The emperor's generosity was a double-edged sword. Now, let's address the bureaucratic elephant in the room: Roman bureaucracy. If you think modern red tape is a nightmare, the Romans were the original authors of that particular horror novel. The administration of the empire was a colossal undertaking, with layers of officials, clerks, and governors all trying to keep the imperial machine running smoothly. Spoiler alert, it rarely did. Tax collectors were as beloved then as they are now, and corruption was as rampant as pigeons in a piazza. But there's a twist. For all its inefficiencies, the Roman bureaucracy was surprisingly effective at one thing: maintaining control. The empire's reach was vast, and its bureaucracy was the glue that held it all together. It was the unsung hero of Roman stability, ensuring that the emperor's decrees were implemented from the marble halls of the Senate to the far-flung corners of the empire. Sure, it was cumbersome and often corrupt, but it got the job done. Kind of like a clunky old computer that crashes every hour, but still manages to send your emails. As you navigate the forum, you're reminded that this is where the empire lives and breathes. It's a chaotic ballet of business and politics, where the whispers of senators mingle with the cries of merchants. The forum is a marketplace of ideas and goods, where fortunes are made and lost, and where the fate of the empire can change with a single, well-placed rumor. And speaking of rumors, let's talk about the gossip mill. Roman society thrived on it. With emperors and senators living their lives in the public eye, every scandal, every intrigue was fodder for the masses. The Roman Forum was Twitter before Twitter, a place where news spread like wildfire, often with the same dubious accuracy. It's a reminder that human nature hasn't changed much over the millennia. We've always been a society that loves to peek behind the curtain, to see the drama unfold in real time. As you leave the forum, the sun setting on another day in this grand empire, you're left with a sense of awe and a touch of cynicism. The Roman world is one of contrasts, glorious yet gritty, sophisticated yet savage. It's a place where the roads are hard, the politics harder, and the bureaucracy hardest of all. But it's also a world of possibility, where the past is always present, and where the future is being forged in the crucible of history. So, as you navigate the bustling streets back to your villa, dodging chariots and sidestepping piles of refuse, you carry with you the realization that Rome is more than just an empire. It's an idea, a living testament to the power of ambition, innovation, and yes, a bit of political chicanery. In the end, the roads may be rough, the politics ruthless, and the bureaucracy relentless, but they're all part of the rich tapestry that is Rome, a world forever on the brink of something new. As the sun casts its final golden glow over the cityscape, you find yourself swept up in the evening tide of Roman life, where entertainment is as essential as bread and olive oil. Welcome to the Roman night, where leisure activities range from the downright macabre to the socially strategic. First stop, the Colosseum, the grand amphitheater that's less about ancient architecture and more about ancient adrenaline. Ah, the Colosseum, a structure so iconic it practically screams, "Are you not entertained?" And entertained they were, as long as your idea of a good time involves blood, sand, and possibly a lion or two. This architectural marvel, completed in 80 AD under Emperor Titus, could seat 50,000 spectators, a number rivaling a modern sports stadium. The games were free to the public, courtesy of the emperor's deep pockets and deeper desire for popularity. But let's be clear, this wasn't just about fun and games. It was about power, specifically the emperor's power to control the narrative, quelling the masses with bread and circuses while Rome simmered beneath. The myth of the Colosseum as a symbol of relentless debauchery, partially true. Yes, gladiators fought to the death, and yes, exotic beasts were paraded and slain, but it's not all swords and sandals. The games served a social function, reinforcing Rome's militaristic culture and the emperor's munificence. And let's not forget the intermissions, where public executions added a grim reminder of the emperor's iron grip. But let's pivot from the gore to the gourmet. Not all Romans were thrill-seekers of the Colosseum variety. For those inclined toward the finer things in life, or at least the finer things they could afford, there were the ceni, or dinner parties. Picture a Roman dinner as a three-act play: the gustatio, or appetizers, the prima mensa, the main course, and the secunda mensa, dessert. This was not just about eating. It was an exercise in rhetoric, wit, and social maneuvering. A typical cena could cost a host anywhere from 100 to 1,000 sesterces, depending on how lavish you wanted to be. That's like throwing a dinner party today and deciding between a homemade casserole or a Michelin-starred feast. The rich and powerful used these gatherings to network, solidify alliances, and elevate their social status. The food was as much a weapon as a sword, with dishes designed to impress and awe, from stuffed dormice to the much-beloved garum. And let's not forget the wine, diluted, of course, because getting plastered was frowned upon, unless you were a poet, in which case it was practically encouraged. Dinner parties were also a chance to display your home's opulence. If you had a triclinium, your guests would recline on couches, because who wants to sit upright when you can lounge like a deity? The room would be adorned with frescoes and mosaics showing off your impeccable taste, or perhaps your latest conquest in Gaul. Not that you'd boast about it. Modesty was key, at least in appearance. Of course, not everyone could partake in these lavish affairs. The average Roman, if lucky, might find entertainment in the local tavern or at a public bathhouse, the latter being a social hub and a place for gossip, relaxation, and occasionally plotting the downfall of a rival. The baths were the great equalizer. Entry was cheap, usually around a quadrans, the smallest Roman coin. Here, rich and poor alike could mingle, albeit in separate sections, soaking in the heated pools or enjoying a massage. For many, this was the highlight of their day, a brief escape from the grind of Roman life. And now, let's address the stereotype of Romans as relentless party animals. Sure, the upper crust knew how to throw a shindig, but let's not forget the reality for most. While the elite indulged, the majority of Romans were more likely to spend their evenings in relative sobriety, perhaps catching a play at the local theater if they were feeling cultured. The plays often skewed bawdy, filled with slapstick humor and political satire, a not-so-subtle jab at the powers that be. Reflecting on the day, it's tempting to romanticize villa life as a constant parade of luxury and leisure. But remember, the villa was as much a workplace as a palace, a hub of activity where slaves toiled and the wealthy schemed. The allure of Roman life was undeniable, yet it was built on a foundation of stark realities, economic divides, political machinations, and social hierarchies as rigid as the marble columns lining your atrium. As you settle into your lectures for the night, the weight of the day's events lingering like the scent of olive oil and incense, consider the legacy of Rome. The Colosseum, the dinner parties, the bustling forums, they're more than just historical footnotes. They're reminders of a civilization that thrived on contrasts. Opulence coexisted with brutality, and where the past continues to echo through the corridors of time. In the end, the story of Rome is the story of humanity itself, ambitious, flawed, and endlessly fascinating. So, as your eyes close and you drift into dreams of ancient glories, remember that history isn't just a series of events. It's a tapestry of lives, each thread woven into the grand narrative of the world. Sleep well, knowing you've walked in the sandals of the Romans, if only for a day. As the first light of dawn breaks over the ancient city of Babylon, you're already up and about, ready to dive headfirst into the cacophony of life that makes this place tick. The streets are alive with the sounds of merchants setting up their stalls, cattle lowing in the distance, and the soft hum of a city that never quite sleeps. You dodge a cart laden with clay tablets, careful not to trip. Those things are heavy, and no one wants to start their day with a broken toe and a lecture from a cranky scribe. Strolling through Babylon, you can't help but notice the meticulous urban planning that underpins it all. This isn't just any ancient city. This is the brainchild of rulers who knew that a city's strength lay in its structure. Take the Ishtar Gate, for example, an entrance so grand it could make even the most hardened traveler stop and gape. Built around 575 BCE by order of King Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, it's adorned with glazed bricks depicting dragons and bulls, each symbolizing a different god. But it's not just about aesthetics. Those walls, stretching over 11 miles, are a testament to the city's defensive prowess. Try invading that fortress without an invitation. Good luck. As you meander through the city, you notice the surprising cleanliness. Forget the grimy streets you might expect of an ancient metropolis. Babylon's inhabitants knew a thing or two about sanitation. They had drainage systems that would make a modern city planner nod in approval. Waste was managed with an efficiency that seems almost contemporary. And let's not forget the Euphrates River, the lifeline of Babylon, coursing through the city like a vein. It provided water not just for drinking, but for irrigation, supporting the lush gardens and orchards that added a touch of verdant serenity to urban life. Speaking of gardens, let's pause for a moment to tackle the elephant, or should I say, hanging plant, in the room, the fabled hanging gardens of Babylon. Ah, the stories. Lush terraces cascading with exotic flora, built by Nebuchadnezzar Roman II to please his homesick wife. Sounds romantic, right? But before you start packing your bags for a horticultural pilgrimage, here's the kicker. There's no solid evidence they ever existed. Ancient texts from Babylon are suspiciously silent on the matter. It's kind of like the Elvis of ancient wonders. Everyone talks about it, but no one's ever seen it. What Babylon did excel at, however, was more down-to-earth gardening. The city was surrounded by fertile lands, thanks to the Euphrates. Babylonians cultivated barley, dates, and a variety of fruits and vegetables, using sophisticated irrigation systems to ensure lush harvests. This wasn't just about sustenance, it was about status and survival. A well-fed citizenry was a content citizenry, and in a place like Babylon, where political power ebbed and flowed like the river itself, keeping people happy was as crucial as keeping invaders out. As you continue your walk, you're enveloped by the smell of fresh bread baking. It leads you to a bustling market, where every sense is bombarded. Merchants shout out their prices, hoping to attract buyers with their wares, everything from textiles to spices to livestock. Prices are haggled over with the intensity of a modern-day stock exchange. You might hear a merchant quoting a price of 10 shekels for a sack of barley, only to settle for 7 after some good-natured haggling. In Babylon, trade is more than just a transaction. It's an art form. The city is a hub of commerce, drawing traders from across the known world. Goldsmiths and silversmiths ply their trade, their goods glistening in the early morning sun. The clink of coins is a constant rhythm, underscoring the importance of economic prosperity in maintaining Babylon's status as a powerhouse of the ancient world. As the morning unfolds, you can't help but feel a sense of awe at how this ancient city, with its blend of order and chaos, continues to thrive. It's a place where myth and reality intertwine, where the majesty of the Ishtar Gate coexists with the gritty realities of daily life. And while the tales of hanging gardens might be just that, tales, there's no denying the very real achievements of Babylon and its people. As you wander these streets, you're not just witnessing history, you're walking through it, one step at a time. Now, let's slip into the daily rhythm of Babylon as the aroma of freshly baked bread pulls you like a siren call towards a typical Babylonian breakfast table. Spoiler alert, no pancakes or lattes here, folks. Instead, you're looking at a spread that would make a modern hipster brunch look downright pedestrian. Picture this. The staple of the Babylonian diet, barley, is front and center. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of your superfood quinoa, minus the Instagram glamour. Barley wasn't just for bread, although you would find it in flatbreads aplenty. It was also used for porridge, and most importantly, beer. Yes, beer, sometimes referred to as liquid bread. In fact, beer was so crucial that it was part of the standard workers' wages. Talk about benefits. If you were laboring on those colossal ziggurates, you weren't just sweating it out for a sack of barley. You were also getting your fair share of brewskis. And speaking of ziggurates, let's clear up a little misconception. These weren't just towering temples or the ancient world's answer to the Burj Khalifa. Sure, they had their religious significance, but they also doubled as storehouses. Picture them as the Costco of Babylon, minus the bulk toilet paper. They stored grain and other essentials, a vital role given that food security back then was as fickle as a teenage romance. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was that food scarcity was a constant specter lurking in the shadows. Ever heard of the Babylonian feast? You know, those extravagant affairs filled with enough food to feed a small nation. Well, they did happen, but not everyone got a golden ticket. Those feasts were mostly for the elite, the ancient one-percenters, if you will. For the average Babylonian, meals were a more modest affair. The abundance on the rich man's table was often a stark contrast to the scarcity faced by common folk. A bit like catching a glimpse of a billionaire's yacht while you're eating ramen noodles. Now, let's talk economics, because nothing says good morning like diving into the cost of barley. In Babylon, a shekel could get you quite a bit of grain, but prices fluctuated like today's stock market. In a good year, with bountiful harvests, a shekel might stretch further, but throw in a bad growing season, and suddenly you're paying premium prices for your daily bread. It's the ancient equivalent of avocado toast inflation. Trade played a crucial role here, too. Babylon was a bustling hub of global commerce, sitting pretty at the crossroads of major trade routes. Goods flowed in from all over, copper from Oman, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and timber from Lebanon. This trade wasn't just about luxury. It was a lifeline. It ensured a flow of essential goods and commodities, buffering against local shortages. But it also highlighted the stark economic divides. The wealthy could afford these exotic luxuries, while the commoners might only dream of such finery as they sipped their humble barley beer. And speaking of that beer, let's not underestimate its social significance. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was a social glue, much like coffee shops today. Taverns were where news was exchanged. Think of them as the social media of ancient Babylon, minus the cat memes. But here's the twist. Even beer was a marker of social stratification. The quality of your brew said a lot about your status. A rich man's beer was a finely crafted potion, while a commoner's might be a bit more, let's say, rustic. So, as you sit there munching on your barley bread, spare a thought for the complex web of economics, agriculture, and social structures that brought it to your table. This isn't just breakfast. It's a bite-sized lesson in the intricacies of ancient Babylonian society. And as the day unfolds, remember that every meal, every transaction, every sip of beer is a thread in the rich tapestry of life in Babylon. But don't get too comfortable. There's still plenty more to unravel in this ancient city's storied past. And speaking of unraveling, let's weave our way into the midday hum of Babylonian academia. Now, when you think ancient school, don't conjure images of Hermione Granger waving her wand at Hogwarts. Instead, picture a bunch of kids hunched over clay tablets, etching out cuneiform with a stylus, and praying they don't mess up because erasers aren't a thing yet. Welcome to the Sumerian scribble school, the birthplace of the written word, and one of history's most grueling educational boot camps. In Babylon, education wasn't a universal right, but a privilege, mostly reserved for the sons of the elite. That's right. If you were the offspring of a merchant, priest, or official, you might find yourself in a school known as an edaba, or tablet house. These weren't cozy little classrooms with beanbags and motivational posters. No, sir. The school was more like a stern, no-nonsense workshop where aspiring scribes learned the art of cuneiform script. We're talking over 600 symbols to memorize, each with its own unique squiggle and flourish. It's like trying to master Chinese characters, but with clay and a pointy stick. Now, Don't let the romantic notion of scribes fool you. Sure, they were the rock stars of the administrative world, but their path to glory was paved with long hours and repetitive drills. They churned out records, contracts, and letters, making sure Babylon's bureaucratic machine ran like a well-oiled ziggurat. Picture them as the unsung heroes of the ancient world, penning the poetry of everyday life one tablet at a time. But let's pause to dissect the societal mechanics of this educational system. It's crucial to remember that not everyone got this golden ticket to literacy. Education was a luxury, and like any luxury, it reflected the rigid class structures in Babylon. This wasn't a world where the plucky underdog could claw their way to the top. If you were born into a family of farmers, your education was more likely to involve a plow than a stylus. Gender played its part too. While there were a few rare instances of women scribes, the overwhelming majority of students were boys. Babylonian girls typically learned the domestic arts, ensuring the home fires burned, while the boys scribbled away at tablets. And here's where we get to a legendary figure who needs no introduction, Hammurabi. You might know him as the guy who hammered out the code that's often hailed as one of the earliest examples of legal systems. But let's not get too swept away by the Hollywood version of Hammurabi as the wise, all-seeing judge. His code wasn't a benevolent guide to justice for all. It was more like a PR campaign in stone, designed to consolidate power and assert authority over a sprawling empire. The Code of Hammurabi, etched into an imposing black stone stele, was a collection of 282 laws. It's the stuff of legal legend, with its eye for an eye ethos. But here's the rub. Justice in Hammurabi's Babylon was far from equal. The code was as much about maintaining social order as it was about justice. It's like the fine print on a contract, seemingly impartial but heavily skewed in favor of the ruling class. The penalties varied drastically depending on your status. If a nobleman put out another nobleman's eye, he'd pay a fine. But if he blinded a commoner, it was curtains for the unlucky chap. And let's not forget about women. Most of the time, they were treated as property to be managed, exchanged, or punished as the law dictated. So, what's the takeaway here? Hammurabi's code wasn't just a legal framework. It was a mirror reflecting the stark realities of Babylonian society. It laid bare the hierarchies and power dynamics that shaped daily life. And while it's tempting to romanticize it as a beacon of ancient justice, the truth is that it was as much about control as it was about fairness. Amidst this backdrop of law and scribes, we see Babylon's political machinery chugging along. The king sat at the top of the pyramid, wielding supreme authority, his power bolstered by a network of officials and governors. These bureaucrats were the cogs in the great Babylonian wheel, ensuring taxes were collected, laws enforced, and the king's decrees carried out. It was a finely tuned operation, one that kept the city's vast and diverse population in check. Yet, despite this seemingly rigid hierarchy, Babylon was a melting pot of cultures and ideas. The city was a magnet for scholars, traders, and adventurers from across the ancient world. It was a place where ideas collided and fused. Mathematics, astronomy, and literature flourished under the watchful eye of the king and his scribes. The legacy of Babylonian scholarship would echo through the ages, influencing Greek and Roman thought, and eventually seeping into the very foundations of modern science and philosophy. As we wrap up our midday excursion into the intellectual heart of Babylon, it's clear that this was a society of contrasts, a place where the mighty Ishtar Gate stood as a symbol of power, yet within its walls, the common man toiled under the weight of social inequalities. A city where the myths of hanging gardens and enlightened kings masked a reality that was far more complex and nuanced. But don't hang up your stylus just yet. There's plenty more to explore. Babylon is a city that refuses to be pinned down by a single narrative. Its stories are as layered as the cuneiform tablets that recorded them, waiting to be discovered, one shard at a time. So, as we leave behind the bustling tablet houses and imposing legal codes, remember that the heartbeat of Babylon was more than just its grand ambitions and legendary kings. It was its people, living, learning, and navigating the intricate web of their ancient world. Stay tuned, because there's still a whole lot of Babylonian life to unearth. So, as we trade the academic air of scribble schools for the bustling streets of Babylon, let's plunge into the afternoon chaos of the marketplace. It's like stepping into a medieval Times Square, but with fewer billboards and more sandals. Here, the pulse of Babylon beats loudest, a cacophony of voices, haggling, and the occasional bray of a stubborn donkey thrown in for good measure. Now, let's get down to brass tacks, or should I say, lapis lazuli beads. Babylon's economy was a well-oiled machine, driven by the relentless engine of trade. If you think today's global trade is impressive, you'd be floored by the sheer scope of Babylon's commercial reach. Merchants from the farthest corners of the known world converged here, their camels and donkeys laden with exotic goods. Picture the Silk Road on steroids, minus the Marco Polo selfies. You've got lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, the blue gold of the ancient world. We're talking deep, celestial blue stones that could make even the most jaded Instagram influencer swoon. These weren't just shiny baubles. They were status symbols, worn by the elite to showcase their wealth and power. Then there's the textile trade, a veritable tapestry of colors and fabrics. Babylonian merchants dealt in wool, linen, and even silk. Yes, silk. Those precious threads traveled along trade routes from as far as China, long before the Silk Road was even a twinkle in history's eye. So, if you thought Babylon was all about clay tablets and dusty old laws, think again. This was a city of style and substance, where fashion spoke volumes. And how did these merchants keep track of their bustling trade? Enter the Babylonian banking system, a marvel of ancient financial ingenuity. Forget about your online banking and fintech apps. These guys had it figured out millennia ago. Temples and private enterprises alike acted as proto-banks, offering loans, accepting deposits, and facilitating trade. They did this all without a single computer in sight. Imagine the paperwork. The Temple of Marduk, for instance, wasn't just a place of worship. It was a financial hub, the Wall Street of its day, where priests doubled as accountants, scribbling down transactions on clay tablets with the precision of an ancient CPA. Currency in Babylon might not have had the bling of modern coins, but it was no less sophisticated. The shekel, a unit of weight and currency, was the backbone of Babylonian commerce. A shekel of silver could buy you a decent chunk of barley or a few gallons of beer, essentials, obviously. But the true innovation was in credit and contracts. Merchants didn't always lug around sacks of silver. They used promissory notes and credit lines. It's like your modern credit card, except instead of plastic, you had a clay tablet with a promise to pay. Try swiping that at the checkout. But let's not get carried away by the romantic notion of Babylonian opulence. Beneath the gloss of prosperity, the marketplace was a microcosm of the city's stark inequalities. The wealthy elite might stroll through the market, picking out the finest goods with a flick of their wrist, but for the common Babylonian, it was a different story. Prices fluctuated wildly, and the average citizen had to haggle for every shekel's worth. It was a high-stakes game of supply and demand, where a bad harvest or a distant war could send prices skyrocketing faster than you can say recession. Then there's the matter of social mobility, or lack thereof. Sure, a lucky merchant might climb the social ladder, but for most, the marketplace was a constant reminder of their place in the social hierarchy. It was a world where your birth dictated your worth, and no amount of hard work could change that. The merchants, the craftsmen, the farmers, they all played their part in the grand Babylonian economy, but the rewards were far from evenly distributed. And let's not forget the role of women in this economic tapestry. While the marketplace was predominantly a man's world, women weren't mere bystanders. They participated in trade, managed households, and in some cases, even ran their own businesses. And it's a big but, they still faced significant legal and social restrictions. Their rights were limited, and their economic power was often tied to their marital status. It was a man's world, but women found ways to navigate it, often with more savvy than their male counterparts. So, as you wander through the market, dodging a particularly aggressive goat and trying not to get swindled by a smooth-talking merchant, remember that this chaos is the lifeblood of Babylon. It's a place where fortunes are made and lost, where the hum of commerce is as constant as the flow of the Euphrates. And while it's easy to get swept up in the romance of exotic goods and ancient wealth, the reality is that the marketplace was as much about survival as it was about luxury. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the bustling stalls, take a moment to breathe it all in. The sights, the sounds, the smells. This is Babylon in all its gritty, glorious reality. It's a city that defies easy narratives, where the stories of wealth and power are intertwined with those of struggle and perseverance. So, hold onto your shekels and keep your wits about you, because the day in Babylon is far from over. There's still a whole lot more to discover in this ancient metropolis, where every corner holds a new story waiting to be told. As the golden hue of the setting sun begins to paint the sky over Babylon, it's time to shift gears from the clamor of the marketplace to the more mystical, yet equally bustling, world of ancient Babylonian spirituality. Here, religion isn't just a Sunday affair. It's the very fabric of daily life, woven tightly with strands of politics, science, and society. So, let's dive into the sacred heart of this ancient city and see what divine wisdom, or cosmic chaos, awaits us. Now, you might think visiting a temple in ancient Babylon is like entering a serene sanctuary, but picture more of a spiritual Times Square. The ziggurat, that iconic stepped tower reaching skyward, is a central player in this divine drama. Let's head to the grand ziggurat dedicated to Marduk, the chief deity. Because in Babylon, if you're going to worship, you might as well aim high. This temple isn't just a pretty facade. It's a power statement in baked brick, a testament to the city's architectural prowess and spiritual ambition. You'd have to climb about 7 stories of stairs, and trust me, that's a workout that'll have you praying halfway up. Once you're in, the temple is alive with activity. Priests, dressed in robes that make them look like extras from a biblical epic, are busy performing rituals that seem as esoteric as they are elaborate. But let's not get too caught up in the incense and chanting without digging into what's really going on here. These rituals aren't just for spiritual enlightenment. They're a well-choreographed blend of religion and politics. You see, the priests hold serious sway in Babylon's power structure. Their role is as much about managing celestial affairs as it is about keeping the earthly order in check. Now, let's talk deities. Babylon wasn't just a one-god town. You've got Marduk, who's basically the head honcho, but the pantheon is as crowded as a Hollywood award show. There's Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, because why limit yourself to just one domain? And E, the god of wisdom and trickery. And let's not forget Nabu, the god of literacy and patron of scribes, which is fitting given Babylon's love affair with cuneiform. Each god has their own temple, priesthood, and a laundry list of sacred duties. It's like an ancient version of corporate management, but with more lightning bolts and fewer PowerPoint slides. As you watch the priests perform a ritual, perhaps a sacrifice or a libation, it's clear that these ceremonies are about more than just appeasing the gods. They're a show of power, a reminder that the divine and the royal are inextricably linked. The king, often seen as the earthly representative of Marduk, needs the priests to maintain his divine mandate. It's a symbiotic relationship, with the temple serving both spiritual and secular interests. Think of it as the ultimate separation of church and state, except, well, not separated at all. But while the myths paint Babylon as a magical land of mysticism, the reality is a bit more grounded. Take the famous Tower of Babel, for example. Legend has it that humanity's hubris led to its construction and subsequent divine destruction, scattering languages across the earth. Yet no archaeological evidence supports the existence of a tower reaching the heavens. It's a story that's more allegory than architecture, a cautionary tale about the limits of human ambition. The real towers, those ziggurats, were impressive, but hardly the skyscrapers of myth. And speaking of myths, let's touch on Babylonian astrology. The Babylonians were the original stargazers, charting the movements of celestial bodies with a precision that would make NASA nod in approval. Their ziggurats doubled as observatories, where priests studied the stars to predict everything from eclipses to the fate of the king. It's the birthplace of astrology, though let's not confuse it with the daily horoscopes in the back of a glossy magazine. This was serious business, a blend of science and superstition that influenced everything from agricultural cycles to military campaigns. Now, as we wander out of the temple, let's reflect on the cultural legacy of this fascinating civilization. Babylon's impact is etched into the very foundations of modern society. From their contributions to mathematics, ever been grateful for the 60-minute hour. Thank the Babylonians, to their pioneering legal codes, the echoes of Babylonian innovation resonate through time. Even our fascination with the mystical, the idea that the stars might guide our fate, owes a debt to these ancient sky watchers. Yet, it's crucial to remember that Babylon was as much about human struggle as it was about divine ambition. The city's grand achievements were built on the backs of its people, who navigated a world of rigid hierarchies and capricious guards. It was a place of contrasts, where the splendor of the Ishtar Gate coexisted with the harsh realities of daily life. A place where myths were born, but where the truth was often more complex and less glamorous. As our journey through ancient Babylon concludes, let's carry forward the lessons of this storied city. It's a reminder that history is a tapestry of human endeavor, woven with threads of ambition, power, faith, and folly. Babylon's stories are not just relics of the past. They are reflections of our own world, challenging us to look beyond the myths and uncover the truths that lie beneath. So, next time you gaze up at the stars or haggle over a price, remember that you're part of a continuum, a thread in the grand tapestry that began long before Babylon and will continue to weave on long after us. The year was 1533, and England was caught in a whirlpool of political chaos that would make any modern reality show look like a Sunday picnic. In the midst of this drama, Elizabeth Tudor made her grand entrance on September 7th. Daughter of the infamous Henry Roman VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth was born into a world where heads rolled quite literally, and the throne was as stable as a three-legged stool. Now, Henry Roman VIII wasn't exactly the poster child for stable relationships. By the time Elizabeth was born, he'd already divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and had gone to the lengths of creating the Church of England to do so. Talk about commitment to divorce. But this wasn't just about love lost. It was a high-stakes game of thrones, with Henry betting the house on Anne Boleyn providing him with a male heir. Spoiler alert, that didn't pan out. Instead, got Elizabeth, who would eventually become one of the most formidable rulers in English history. But at the time, just another girl in a kingdom desperate for a boy. Let's not sugarcoat it. Being born a girl in Tudor England was like drawing the short straw at a rigged carnival. Elizabeth's birth didn't just disappoint, it shook the very foundations of Henry's ambitions. Her mother, Anne, would find herself losing her head, literally, when Elizabeth was just 2 years old. By then, Henry had already moved on to Jane Seymour, wife number 3, who finally gave him the son he craved, Edward VI. Fun fact, Henry Roman VIII would end up marrying a total of 6 times. Talk about persistence. But let's get back to Elizabeth. Any lesser mortal might have crumbled under such a start, but Elizabeth was made of sterner stuff. Her early years were spent in a political minefield, surrounded by intrigue and betrayal. And while fairy tales might paint a picture of a lonely princess pining in a tower, the reality was much grittier. Elizabeth learned to navigate these treacherous waters with all the grace of a seasoned diplomat before she was even out of her teens. Fast forward to 1553, and the throne had become a game of musical chairs. After Henry's death in 1547, his son Edward took the helm at the tender age of 9. His reign was short and not particularly sweet, lasting just 6 years. When young Edward succumbed to illness, Mary I, Elizabeth's half-sister, took over. Known as Bloody Mary for her penchant for burning Protestants at the stake, Mary was not exactly the sisterly type. She viewed Elizabeth as a threat, partly due to Elizabeth's Protestant leanings in a Catholic court. This was a time when religious affiliation wasn't just a matter of personal belief, it was a ticket to power or a one-way trip to the gallows. Mary's paranoia led to Elizabeth's imprisonment in the Tower of London in 1554, a foreboding place where even the bravest souls shivered. The Tower wasn't exactly the Hilton. Think more chains and dungeons than room service and spa treatments. It was a testament to Elizabeth's cunning and resilience that she emerged from this ordeal not only with her head intact, but with her spirit unbroken. She played it cool, maintaining her innocence and biding her time. A primary source recounts that she famously said, "Much suspected by me, nothing proved can be." After Mary's death in 1558, Elizabeth ascended to the throne. But let's not rush ahead. The path to power was littered with political landmines, and Elizabeth was acutely aware of the precarious nature of her position. She was a woman in a man's world, ruling over a nation that expected her to marry and defer to a husband. And yet, Elizabeth chose a different path, one that would define her legacy. The legend of the Virgin Queen is a tale steeped in romance and myth, but let's peel back the layers. The truth is, Elizabeth's decision to remain unwed was as much about political strategy as personal choice. In a world where marriage often meant ceding power to a husband, staying single allowed Elizabeth to wield her authority unchallenged. It was a shrewd move that kept potential suitors and political rivals at bay. Elizabeth's early life was a masterclass in survival against all odds. She was more than just a footnote in a history defined by men. She was a force of nature, a ruler who defied convention and shaped the fate of a nation. Her story is not just about the crown she wore, but the decisions she made, the challenges she faced, and the indomitable spirit that saw her through it all. As we dive deeper into the saga of Elizabeth I, remember, beneath the gilded facade of the Virgin Queen lies the heart of a survivor, a woman who played the game of power with unmatched skill and cunning. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. Elizabeth's journey to the English throne in 1558 could easily be mistaken for an Elizabethan soap opera, full of enough intrigue and betrayal to make Shakespeare blush. When Mary I's reign ended with her death, the crown didn't simply fall into Elizabeth's lap like a forgotten heirloom. She had to dodge a minefield of rival claims and religious chaos to secure her place. The Protestant Reformation was still sending shockwaves through Europe, and England was smack dab in the middle of the theological tempest. Religious tension wasn't just a matter of Sunday sermons. It was the political backbone of the era. Mary I had wholeheartedly embraced Catholicism and had made it her mission to reverse her father's Protestant reforms by any means necessary, including a few too many trips to the stake. Her death marked a seismic shift, with Elizabeth poised to bring back Protestantism. This wasn't just about divine rights or theological debates. It was about solidifying power in a deeply divided kingdom. Elizabeth had a knack for playing the political chess game like a grandmaster. Her first move, the Elizabethan religious settlement of 1559. This wasn't some half-baked plan scribbled on the back of a napkin. It was a calculated strategy to stabilize the nation. Elizabeth knew she couldn't please everyone, trying to be as feudal as herding cats. Instead, she aimed for a middle ground, a via media that would allow Catholics and Protestants to coexist. This meant reinstating the Book of Common Prayer and establishing the monarch as the supreme governor of the Church of England. With this, she threaded the needle between two fiery factions, all while sidestepping the Pope's wrath and the ire of Catholic Europe. It was a risky move, but Elizabeth had never been one to play it safe. But let's not get too swept away in tales of religious diplomacy without addressing the royal elephant in the room, Elizabeth's marital status. The Virgin Queen moniker wasn't just a catchy title, it was a political stance. In a world where queens were expected to marry and produce heirs faster than you could say dynastic stability, Elizabeth's refusal to wed was both revolutionary and, frankly, a little cheeky. Her court was a revolving door of suitors from across Europe, each hoping to win her hand, and with it, England's crown. But Elizabeth was as elusive as she was charming, playing the marriage card like a seasoned gambler who knew the stakes were higher than just her personal happiness. Take, for instance, the dashing Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. His relationship with Elizabeth was the stuff of juicy court gossip, ripe with rumors and innuendo. Theirs was a flirtation that had tongues wagging from London to Madrid. Yet, despite speculation and scandal, Elizabeth never took the plunge. Why? Because marrying Dudley would have been akin to lighting a match in a room full of gunpowder, given his questionable reputation and the fact that his wife had died under mysterious circumstances. Elizabeth knew that any marriage, especially to someone like Dudley, could undermine her authority and plunge her kingdom into chaos. Then there was Philip Roman II of Spain, Elizabeth's former brother-in-law, and a man who viewed himself as Europe's Catholic savior. His proposal wasn't so much a romantic gesture as it was a political maneuver. Marrying Philip would have been like inviting a fox into the henhouse, with Spain eyeing England as a Catholic trophy ripe for the taking. Elizabeth deftly sidestepped this overture, choosing sovereignty over subjugation. Her refusal was a masterstroke of diplomacy, sending a clear message that England was not up for grabs. In a world obsessed with dynastic unions, Elizabeth's decision to remain unwed was as shrewd as it was bold. It allowed her to wield her power unencumbered by the whims of a husband, something few women of her time could boast. The myth of the Virgin Queen, alluring as it is, masks the pragmatic genius of her choice. It wasn't just about preserving her independence. It was about maintaining control over her kingdom in an era when a queen's marriage could shift the balance of power faster than you could say, "I do." Elizabeth's early reign was a testament to her political acumen and her ability to navigate a male-dominated world with the finesse of a ballerina on a tightrope. She was more than just a figurehead. She was a ruler who understood that her image was as crucial as her policies. By crafting her identity as the Virgin Queen, she projected an image of purity and devotion that resonated with her Protestant subjects while simultaneously keeping potential suitors and their ambitions at bay. The tale of Elizabeth's ascent is not just a story of a queen who refused to marry or a monarch who deftly managed religious strife. It's the saga of a woman who understood the intricacies of power and played the game like a maestro. Her reign was not without its challenges, but her ability to adapt and strategize was the key to her success. As we continue exploring her legacy, remember that Elizabeth's story is not just about the crown she wore, but the choices she made to keep it firmly on her head. Stay tuned, because the plot is only just beginning to thicken. And so, as Elizabeth's reign gathered steam, it was time for a showdown that would make even the most action-packed blockbuster seem like a quiet afternoon nap. Enter the Spanish Armada of 1588, a colossal clash that was more than just a naval engagement. It was a seismic event that would shape the destiny of nations. Picture it, a fleet of 130 ships, the pride of Spain, bristling with over 30,000 men, all set to teach little England a lesson in humility. Talk about overkill. But let's rewind a bit and set the stage. The year was 1588, and England was dancing on a tightrope of political tension. Spain, under the rule of King Philip Roman II, was the superpower of the day. Imagine a medieval version of the global superpower, armed to the teeth and not afraid to throw its weight around. Philip, still smarting from Elizabeth's rebuff of his marriage proposal, and possibly the world's longest case of sour grapes, was determined to bring England back into the Catholic fold by hook or by crook, or by ship, as it turns out. Now, the myth of the Spanish Armada is the stuff of legend, swashbuckling heroes, daring sea battles, and a queen's rousing speech that could supposedly stir even the most lethargic of souls into action. But let's peel back the varnish and get to the nuts and bolts. The reality was a logistical nightmare that would give any modern-day military planner a migraine. The Spanish plan was to sail up the English Channel, link up with the Duke of Parma's forces in the Netherlands, and then invade England. Simple, right? Well, not quite. The English Channel, with its unpredictable weather and treacherous waters, was less of a red carpet and more of a minefield waiting to thwart even the best-laid plans. Elizabeth, never one to shy away from a challenge, rallied her troops at Tilbury with that famous speech. You know the one. I know I have the body of a weak, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too. Stirring stuff, though actual historians debate whether she even delivered it in that exact form. But who doesn't love a good bit of theatrical flair? In truth, Elizabeth's role wasn't just about giving pep talks. She was the linchpin holding the nation together, a symbol of unity in a time of crisis. Behind the scenes, the English were frantically preparing for battle. The economy was stretched thinner than a piece of overcooked pasta, and the coffers weren't exactly overflowing. Defending against the Spanish onslaught required some serious budgeting. The English fleet, though smaller, was nimbler, with about 200 ships at its disposal. These vessels, commanded by seasoned seafarers like Sir Francis Drake, were less about brute strength and more about tactical agility. Think of it as a naval game of chess, where outmaneuvering your opponent was the name of the game. And speaking of maneuvering, the English had a secret weapon, the wind. While the Spanish Armada was laden with heavy galleons, built to withstand Atlantic storms, the English ships were built for speed and dexterity. The wind, which seemed to have a personal vendetta against the Spanish, played havoc with their formations. The English took full advantage of this, employing fire ships, essentially floating bombs, to break the Spanish line, causing chaos and confusion. The economic realities were brutal. War wasn't cheap, and the strain on England's finances was immense. But Elizabeth's ability to galvanize her resources and her people was nothing short of remarkable. The ripple effects of the Armada's defeat were monumental. England emerged from the conflict not just with its sovereignty intact, but with a newfound status on the global stage. The once mighty Spain was left licking its wounds, its invincible image shattered. This wasn't just about military victory, it was about a shift in power dynamics. England's triumph over the Spanish Armada marked the dawn of a new era, setting the stage for its rise as a formidable maritime power. The victory was a testament to Elizabeth's leadership, a blend of cunning strategy, shrewd diplomacy, and an uncanny ability to inspire her nation. Her image as the Virgin Queen, unyielding and resolute, was cemented in the annals of history. And yet, let's not romanticize it too much. The victory didn't erase the economic hardships or the political challenges that lay ahead. England was still a nation divided by religious tension, and the threat from abroad was far from over. But for Elizabeth, the defeat of the Spanish Armada was a personal triumph, a vindication of her unorthodox approach to leadership, and a testament to her indomitable spirit. In the wake of the Armada's defeat, Elizabeth's stature, as a symbol of national unity, was elevated to near mythical proportions. Her reign, marked by this pivotal moment, would go down in history as a golden age, a time when England defied the odds and stood its ground against one of the mightiest powers of the time. But the story of Elizabeth I is far from over. The challenges of governance, the intrigues of court, and the ever-present threats from foreign powers continue to weave the tapestry of her remarkable reign. As we delve deeper into the legacy of the Virgin Queen, remember that history is never as straightforward as it seems. There's always more beneath the surface, a world of complexity, drama, and intrigue waiting to be uncovered. Stay with us, because the next chapter promises to be just as thrilling as the last. As the echoes of cannon fire faded from the Spanish Armada's defeat, Elizabeth I might have hoped for a well-deserved break. But if you think the latter part of her reign was a leisurely stroll through peaceful English gardens, think again. The glamour of her earlier years was beginning to tarnish, and the challenges ahead were as plentiful as the ruffles on her iconic gowns. First up, economic hardship. The Elizabethan era is often painted as a golden age, but let's not get too carried away with nostalgia-tinted spectacles. While the arts flourished and Shakespeare penned his plays, the economy was more of a Shakespearean tragedy. The war with Spain had drained the treasury faster than you can say doublet and hose. England was knee-deep in debt, and inflation was as rampant as Elizabethan fashion statements. The crown jewels weren't about to be pawned, but let's just say the royal piggy bank was looking a little light. The cost of war was staggering. Elizabeth's campaigns, especially the ongoing conflict in Ireland, were a financial black hole. Ireland was more than just an unruly neighbour, it was a quagmire of rebellion and resistance. The 9 Years' War, 1594-1603, was a particularly draining affair. Hugh O'Neill, the Earl of Tyrone, wasn't about to roll out the red carpet for English rule. His rebellion was a thorn in Elizabeth's side, costing the English crown around £2 million. To put that in perspective, that's roughly £400 million today, and that's a lot of Elizabethan roughs. The Irish wars weren't just about cash, though. They were a point of pride and a constant headache. Elizabeth's attempts to impose English control were met with fierce resistance. Ireland was a hotbed of Catholic dissent, and the rebellion was as much about religion as it was about sovereignty. The conflict was brutal, with atrocities committed on both sides. The myth of the benevolent English ruler was hard to maintain when English soldiers were torching villages and the Irish were rallying behind their chieftains. Meanwhile, back in the relative safety of the English court, Elizabeth's relationship with Parliament was as rocky as the Irish coastline. Elizabeth was a monarch who understood the art of compromise, but wasn't exactly a fan of being told what to do. Parliament wanted more influence, especially when it came to matters of taxation and governance. Elizabeth, ever the Queen, preferred her own council. Let's face it, she didn't ascend the throne to take orders. But Parliament was growing bolder, and Elizabeth found herself in a bit of a bind. She needed funds to keep the country afloat and the Irish wars in play. To get those funds, she had to play nice with Parliament, which was like asking a cat to fetch. The more she leaned on Parliament for money, the more they tried to nibble away at her authority. It was a delicate dance, a political tango where neither side wanted to step on the other's toes, but both were vying for the lead. Elizabeth's personal struggles were as complex as her political ones. The Virgin Queen persona was a masterclass in PR, but behind that carefully crafted image was a woman burdened by the weight of the crown. Her health was deteriorating, her trusted advisors were dwindling, and the shadow of succession loomed large. Without an heir, the future of the Tudor dynasty was as uncertain as the English weather. The myth of her golden age was just that, a myth. Sure, there were moments of brilliance and cultural bloom, but there were also food shortages, poverty, and public discontent. The reality of Elizabeth's England was a patchwork quilt of prosperity and penury. The legends of gallant knights and grand feasts didn't quite capture the struggles of the common folk grappling with rising prices and poor harvests. And yet, Elizabeth's image remained untarnished in the eyes of her subjects, or at least, that's what the official line was. Her portraits, meticulously crafted to project majesty and mystery, were early examples of spin. Forget Instagram filters. Elizabeth's likenesses were the Renaissance equivalent of Photoshop. She was always shown as youthful, regal, and eternally powerful, even as age and politics took their toll. The reality, however, was that Elizabeth was human, capable of great triumphs, and subject to the same frailties as anyone else. Her later years were marked by an increasing paranoia, a fear of losing control. Her legendary temper flared more often, and her circle of confidants shrank. The Virgin Queen who had once captivated Europe was now a solitary figure, clinging to power in a rapidly changing world. In the end, Elizabeth's reign was more than just a collection of victories and defeats. It was a testament to her resilience and adaptability. She navigated the treacherous waters of monarchy with the skill of a seasoned sailor, even as the storms of economic strife and political unrest threatened to capsize her ship. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of myth and reality, a story of a woman who defied the norms of her time to leave an indelible mark on history. As we prepare to delve into the final chapter of Elizabeth's life, remember that the story of this remarkable queen is not just about the glories of her reign, but the trials she faced and the human struggles that defined her. Stick around, because the concluding act is just around the corner, and it's bound to be as riveting as the rest. So, as Elizabeth's reign drew to a close, the question of succession was the elephant in the room, or perhaps the dragon in the Tudor tapestry. The childless Virgin Queen had done a bang-up job of dodging matrimony, but this left England with a looming existential crisis. Who would take the throne after her? The Tudors were fresh out of heirs, and the prospect of a power vacuum was about as appealing as a banquet without ale. Enter James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and a man with a family tree more tangled than a Shakespearean subplot. If you think the idea of a Scottish king ruling England was a bit of a shock to the system, you're not wrong. But James had the right credentials. He was Protestant, he had a legitimate claim through Henry VII, and he was, crucially, alive. For Elizabeth, who had faced rebellions and assassination plots like most people face Monday mornings, James was the safest bet in a high-stakes game of royal poker. The transition to James I in 1603 was surprisingly smooth, considering the turbulent history of English successions. There were no coups, no bloody battles, just a quiet handover that would make even the most hardened cynic nod in approval. James rode down from Edinburgh to London, probably pondering the wisdom of uniting two nations with a centuries-old rivalry. The journey was about 400 miles, a trip that in those days required more endurance than a Netflix binge-watch session. James's ascension marked the beginning of the Stuart dynasty, and with it, the end of an era. Elizabeth's death on March 24, 1603, was met with an outpouring of national grief. Her 45-year reign had been one of the longest in English history, and she left behind a legacy that was as complex as it was enduring. Under her rule, England had transformed from a beleaguered outpost to a burgeoning empire with its eyes on the world stage. But let's not sugarcoat the Elizabethan legacy with rose-tinted glasses. While the arts flourished, and England won its share of naval glory, the economic woes were never far from the surface. Crown's debt was staggering, a whopping £350,000 by the end of her reign, about £70 million in today's money. The country was also grappling with social unrest, poverty, and the repercussions of inflation. The romantic image of a prosperous golden age was in reality a patchwork quilt of prosperity and struggle. Elizabeth's legacy, however, is more than just a balance sheet. She redefined what it meant to be a queen in a man's world. Her refusal to marry, her steadfast leadership during crises, and her ability to project power and authority without a king consort by her side all set a new standard for female rulers. She was a political pioneer, a woman who understood the power of image and the importance of staying one step ahead of her rivals. Yet, the myth of the Virgin Queen has been romanticized over the centuries, morphing Elizabeth into a near-mythical figure. The notion of her as an untouched sovereign, devoted entirely to her country, has a certain allure. But let's be real. Elizabeth was a shrewd operator, a monarch who leveraged her single status to keep potential threats at bay. Her decision not to marry was as much about maintaining power as it was about personal choice. Fast forward to today, and Elizabeth remains a compelling character in history. Her story resonates in modern discussions of leadership and gender. She broke the mold at a time when the world expected women to fit into neatly defined roles. Her reign challenged the notion that a woman couldn't rule effectively without a husband. In a world still grappling with gender equality, Elizabeth's story serves as both inspiration and a reminder of the complexities that come with breaking barriers. Elizabeth's influence on modern perceptions of leadership is undeniable. Her ability to balance diplomacy with strength, govern with both heart and mind, offers lessons that transcend time. She was a master of political theater, using her public image to unite a nation and project stability. Her speeches, her portraits, and her public appearances were all carefully orchestrated to reinforce her authority. In the end, Elizabeth's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and adversity, wisdom and fallibility. She was a queen who defied expectations and shaped the course of history. As we reflect on her life and reign, we're reminded that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a story of the people who lived it. As we close this chapter on the life of Elizabeth I, let's remember her not just as the Virgin Queen or the last Tudor monarch, but as a woman who changed the game. She left a mark that echoes through the ages, a legacy that continues to challenge, inspire, and captivate. So, whether you're a history buff or just someone who appreciates a good yarn, take a moment to ponder the remarkable life and times of Elizabeth I. Because if there's one thing history's taught us, it's that the stories worth telling are as much about the people as the crowns they wore.